So how are you guys? I am back again with a very fun and exciting new video, which is, what if Naruto was the reincarnation of the Sage of Six Paths and rejected the Shinobi world? Before part 1 started, do like, share and subscribe to the channel and comment down your favorite part. Your one like and one subscribe motivate me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. So without any waste of time, now let's start the fanfic. The thing with immense power is that, after a while, it starts to become to a point aware that it is in fact immense, and like everything else, wants to stay that way. Preservation is a powerful thing. So when the man known as Uchiha Madara combined the cells of Senju Hashirama within himself, he didn't know that it wasn't the cells that he was combining. Madara and Hashirama were in fact reincarnations of the transmigrant chakra of Asura and Indra Otsutsuki, the children of Hagoromo Otsutsuki, known to the world as the Rakudo Sennin. So by combining the chakra of Asura and Indra, Madara was able to awaken incredible power in the form of the legendary Rinnegan. What the Uchiha Patriarch did not know was that by combining such powers together, controlling what it did was not possible. After the Uchiha's death, the cycle should have continued. Asura and Indra were to incarnate once again like they have been since they died. However, when power becomes aware, it does not wish to fade away. Feeling the path that Asura would take, Indra's chakra did the only thing that it could. It attacked. Dominance was the only thing that Indra craved at the point in time that the transmigrant chakras battled in the small blonde host. If Indra could take all of his little brother's power, then he could feel even more alive than he did with only a small portion of it. He only needed to defeat Asura, absorb his power, and then wait for his destined body to be born. Simple enough, right? Nothing is ever simple. The brothers had no idea that their battle of wills was slowly summoning something that was never supposed to come back to this world. He had died, chose to die. He wanted to let humanity live on their own in the peaceful world that he had created. He did not wish to be treated like a god, even if he was the closest one could come to being divine and all-powerful. He had done his job, his dream, and left the world to its own devices. Did he have to leave the world of the living and have faith in humanity? No, he did not. But he chose to give them their freedom and let his body die like everyone else. At the time he had chuckled, he was practically a god his entire life, and he was choosing to leave it as a human. An immortal mortal, such absurdity. Not even he understood how his children's chakra was summoning his own, but he couldn't conjure up a reason to try and stop it, even if he could. He had seen what the world was like after he had left it. Such a sad place was not his legacy. And don't even get him started on his children. So when he felt the gentle yet firm pull, he allowed it to take him. Again he chuckled. Whatever force was doing this, trying to revive him, approached with trepidation. Was he really that scary? Yes, the horns were not an everyday occurrence, but they didn't make him a demon. He was quite the opposite, actually. If they only knew he was the most humble, gentle, and charismatic man ever created, they wouldn't treat him like a god, which he wasn't. Kinda. Now that he thought about it, the idea excited him. He could see his other 9 children again. He didn't get a whole lot of time with them the first time. He knew to a degree that his creations were treated badly since his departure. Something about sealing them into children to create soldiers. People of this time treated them like they were nothing more than mindless monsters, putting them on leashes like pets. He was going to change that. It took a lot to enrage the calm and peaceful man, but when he was, there was nothing more terrifying than a godlike man with the power to destroy the world if he wanted to. What made it even scarier was that, to him, it would be easy. And nothing under the sun and moon could escape his judgment. Again, another chuckle. He created the moon. Finally making his way to his destination, he had stopped the fight between his children. Literally, he arrived and everything paused. There was not a stronger will in existence than his own. It was almost omnipresent and omnipotent. The God-man just felt their presence for a second, forgetting about their unnecessary and oh-so-redundant fighting for the memory of their childhood. When they were still his innocent children, loving and caring, even Indra. Deciding that he had spent enough time just watching them, he absorbed all of Asura's chakra, and then all of Indra's. He could also feel one of his creations near as well, the strongest of them if the enormity was anything to go by. A smile came to his face. He really missed his children, all of them. Asura hadn't resisted at all. He actually embraced his father's overwhelming pull. He was always one to cooperate when he could, and his belief that love was the way to peace was one of the reasons he was appointed as the successor of Ninshu. He knew his youngest son would accept him, he always trusted his father and knew that even if he wanted to he could not stand against him. Not even the gods themselves wouldn't dare deny him. Indra, however, did try and resist. He, like always, wanted all the power for himself. He wanted people to look at him like they did his father, 6 parts respect and 4 parts fear. It angered him that no matter how hard he tried he could never amount to the power he knew his father possessed. It was ridiculous, how was a man able to become so fucking strong? He was so powerful that everyone knew that he had left the realm of mortals and ascended to godhood long ago. Why he let himself die like a weak mortal was beyond him. Like always, whenever his father wanted something to obey, it did. With little to no effort, Indra became a part of him. With one last moment of silence, he allowed his entirety to synchronize with the crying baby. He was vaguely aware of the man and woman that had just taken their last breaths in this world. He guessed that they were his parents. Such a shame, he would have preferred to know them. He could also feel Kurama's presence inside himself. That both made him happy and angry, which was something he disliked being torn. He was happy because he was so close to one of his children so quickly, and angry that one of his sons was once again imprisoned. Once he could, he would change that. He now had a plan, find his children and take them back. They would be safe with him, and he would make sure they never had to feel all the pain, loneliness and hatred they currently were. And bring back the peace he had worked so hard for the last time he walked the earth. What his name used to be is irrelevant now. He was someone new, in a new world to him at least. Everything has changed, and he was going to change it even more. That was his destiny, and he could even feel that his new self was the same. The child of prophecy was born. And the Rakudo Sennin was back. The second coming of peace was nigh. This world, this shinobi-infested world was corrupted and vile, the likes of which he underestimated. Everything was shrouded in secrecy and lies. No one trusted anyone, and it sickened him to his core. He was 6 now, and his life was already full of so much misery. For one, he was the Jinchuriki of the village. The very name disgusted him. A human sacrifice he was not, and his children were not these demons the villagers titled them as. He had seen true demons, fought them even, and they were nothing like his children. The very idea of it was complete stupidity. A weapon that was supposed to protect the very people who hated them. Absurdity. Was he truly the only one to see it as such? On the other hand, he was the bearer of the legendary dojutsu, the Rinnegan. He had known that his eyes would become legend, and that some extremes would worship him as a god, even after his passing, but what actually happened was somewhat disconcerting. His name was only whispered about, fanatical fables of a man-turned-god who blessed humanity with his divine assistance. Again, was such absurdity only just that to him? True, some of the things he had done that lasted to this era seemed impossible, godlike even, but was it truly so hard to believe that he was human? He may refuse to join the Shinobi Academy, but that didn't mean he was ignorant. The stories Kurama told him before he fell asleep were all he really needed to know, that there were people after him that did impossible feats, just like he before them. He himself had witnessed some of the things his youngest son's reincarnations had done, one Senju Hashirama being one of the major ones. His Mokudan skill was tremendous, and he too was able to do the magnificent. So why was it so hard for people to believe that he created the moon? He decided the people of this era were just stupid, plain and simple. His decision was strengthened by his current situation. His 6-year-old body was sitting in the large seat of the Konoha Council chambers, his feet swinging back and forth. This had become a common thing, sitting in the uncomfortable chair, the shinobi discussing shinobi matters, which, in their corrupted minds, involved him. The reason for these common meetings? Uzumaki Naruto, that was his name now, absolutely refused, with a passion as hot as the will of fire, to enroll in the Shinobi Academy. There was nothing anyone could do or say, he would have none of it. He was told about the academy when he first turned 6, the Hokage saying how strong he could become if he joined the shinobi ranks. The old Sarutobi expected a giant smile, and childish remarks. What he did not expect was a nasty snort, followed by a dismissive scoff. Apparently, the Hokage had thought he would actually want to be a shinobi. Preposterous absurdity was what he had to think about that. The Hokage, an old man named Sarutobi Hiruzen, didn't think anything of the boy's uncharacteristically cold response to the idea of becoming a shinobi, deciding it was just childish stubbornness. That line of thinking, however, changed when he brought the idea up a second time. Where Naruto just dismissed it entirely the first time, he outright refused the second, passionately. He stated that, the shinobi life was a corrupted life, and, he wanted nothing to do with it. Why he was so against the idea was beyond the aged warrior. After that, the council stepped in, a man named Shimura Danzo demanding that the boy be given to him. There was talk that Danzo could make him cooperate. That made Naruto chuckle. He'd like to see the old goat try. He shook his head, his thoughts turning bitter and somewhat dark. He disliked the thought he got when thinking about shinobi, and the council, but he just couldn't help it. His host tended to take a single emotion and amplify it. He was either really, really happy, or very, very depressed. He had been spending hours meditating, trying to calm his emotions. It had helped a lot, too. Before his last birthday he wanted nothing more than to lash out at anyone who looked at him with scornful eyes. Now though, through meditation and training, he had calmed his mind. He decided that 6 was an appropriate age for him to begin his physical training. He didn't have muscles or the strength to fight a full-grown adult yet, but he wouldn't get there without starting somewhere. He rolled his ringed eyes, hearing a very old woman agree with Danzo's idea of forced cooperation. These people really craved the power they thought his eyes had. He hadn't shown them anything yet, but they had very vivid imaginations. He sighed again. They had no idea what his eyes could do. He chuckled to himself, they never would, either. It was times like these that he missed his wife. She was so outspoken and knew how to handle these types of situations. He never could get a word in, everyone either purposely talking over him or ignoring him completely. If Tasuki were here, she'd scare the living daylights out of them, and then proceed to scold them for their rude behavior. After she was finished, she'd let him say what he needed to say, and most of the time he wouldn't have to because during her rant she would say everything he wanted to begin with. The very thought of his wife brought a smile to his face. Her memory lit the darkness his heart felt for the shinobi world. When the whispers stopped, his eyes raised, meeting the stares and glares of the council, both shinobi and civilian. The Hokage cleared his throat before speaking. Uzumaki Naruto, I take it that you still refuse to enroll in the Shinobi Academy. Naruto nodded. Hiruzen frowned, taking in a deep breath. I see. That is very unfortunate. He looked like he was against what he was about to say. And he was very, very against what he was going to say. Apparently, and this was according to his supposed friend Danzo, he was jeopardizing the well-being of not just Konohagakure no Sato, but of Hino Kuni, for not forcing the Jinchuriki to become a shinobi. The fact that he wasn't doing everything in his power to force the Leaf's Jinchuriki into the shinobi ranks had forced his rival to go straight to the fire daimyo. That had surprised Hiruzen, but what came of it was even more so. Apparently, the daimyo's personal guard had openings that needed to be filled, and hearing that there was a child born in his country that possessed the famed eyes of the great sage had him very eager and interested in claiming him for the Shinobi Guardian 12. Nothing was official yet, but Konoha was to expect the fire daimyo within 6 months' time, ready to present the boy. Naruto just sighed. He knew that Hiruzen, to an extent, cared for him, and wished nothing but the best for him. He also knew that his refusal to become a shinobi had put almost overwhelming stress on the aged man, both from his village and his country. It saddened him that the man had to go through such hardships because of him, but he couldn't relent and take up something so ugly just for the sake of one man. His beliefs were very important to him, they defined him. Ninjutsu was a perversion of ninshu, something created for nothing but the sole purpose to take another life. Creating a weapon out of a tool for peace and understanding was the ultimate betrayal. It had made him seriously doubt not only himself, but mankind as a whole. He doubted mankind because, even after gaining peace and understanding, they craved for nothing but war and suffering. It was an eye-opener that he seriously did not want to see. He doubted himself because, after all of his hard work, his sacrifices, it wasn't enough, it didn't work. Was the way he believed in peace nothing but a naive dream? Had his belief that humanity could coexist in harmony just a foolish impossibility? That line of thought scared him, not because he wanted to turn his back on humanity, but because of the somewhat terrifying conclusions he would make. Had his mother been right? Otsutsuki Kagaya Hime, the princess that ate the god tree's fruit, his mother, had begun to subtly demand mankind to worship her, ruling over them like a queen, or a goddess. Had she, after bringing peace to the world, seen that humanity was incapable of keeping the peace she had ushered? Had she seen the darkness within their hearts sooner than he? Had she decided that, to save them from themselves, that she'd have to conquer them, inevitably ruling over them? It terrified him, because where he had never looked at it like that before, it made so much sense. In 6 months, the Hokage began, the fire daimyo will arrive in Konoha. He has requested to meet with you. His voice was solemn. He didn't want Minato's child taken from the village. Do you understand, Naruto-kun? Naruto nodded, not particularly caring who wanted to meet with him. Hi, he replied. He knew that this meeting would be used as some way to coax him into joining the shinobi ranks, just like he knew it would be fruitless. He was a priest, a sage. He was not a killer, a shinobi. You are free to go then, Hiruzen said. He gained a sad smile when Naruto gave a giant, childish sigh and practically jumped out of his seat, sprinting to the exit, happy to be excused. Naruto had never brooded in his previous life, finding it to be an unnecessary use of his facial muscles, but lately, with the council on his back, it became a common occurrence. He didn't hate shinobi, but his general dislike towards the creation, and thereby the corruption, of ninshutsu ninjutsu made him a little bitter towards anyone who embraced said corruption. It was staggering to believe that there was anything left of the world and the human race after all the warring and conflict brought into existence with the shinobi lifestyle. How boys grew old enough to become men, lovers, husbands, fathers, it was almost miraculous. How girls lived long enough to be women, lovers, wives, mothers, he was sure that it was by the intervention of something divine, because everywhere one looked there was death, pain, despair, destruction, evil. It was heartbreaking. How could his legacy, his peaceful world become something so wrong? Having the majority of the world all but spit in your face and decline the peace you offer was as sad as it was infuriating. Were all of his so-called accomplishments, his better tomorrow, talk all for naught? Had he not given the world his everything? Had he not fought the demons that plagued the world? Had he not fought the tyrants who wished to rule over the weak with an iron fist? Hadn't he brought people to a better way of life? Had he not fought a god of pure destruction for the simple reason of saving them? He and his Otudo almost died, on multiple occasions, to save those who could not fight for themselves. And after all of it, he had decided that, without understanding, they would never live in harmony. So what did he do? He gave them that understanding. He shared his strength, his beliefs with them, hoping that those who couldn't save themselves would no longer have that problem. He had given them equality, and what had they done with it? They weaponized it. They disfigured it, transforming into a killing tool, into a way to easier hurt others. It was pure sickness. He had decided that during his 5th year back on this earth. The jutsu these shinobi used was a nasty blight, a plague on the people he once fought so hard for. It would sometimes bring tears to his eyes. Those tears increased when he heard the stories Kurama had. One story in particular had him absolutely sick, and then, absolutely furious. He lay on his bed, a long day of training his young body making him tired, too tired to even eat anything. He smiled though, because he could never be too tired to speak with his son. He closed his eyes, the hate-filled, scornful world disappearing. Within seconds, his purple, ringed eyes were open, like he had never shut them to begin with. He smiled a true, pure smile as he gazed at the towering silhouette. He had gotten used to the bars that kept his son prisoner, already giving his word that, as soon as he had the power, he'd rip the cage apart. He had already told his child that, when his eyes had matured, he would never see a cage again. Ever. That was his word, his promise, not as a child, but as the Rakudo Sennin, as Uzumaki Naruto. The towering silhouette perked at the form before him, leaning down to get as close as possible. They spoke all the time, every day, as many times as they possibly could, but even then, he couldn't get enough. Kurama smiled. It was a strange thing to most, seeing the most power Biju in existence smile in complete happiness, but then again, he wasn't most. He wasn't a stranger, an onlooker, an arrogant fool. "Hello, father," Kurama said in a joyful voice, happy to see his father again, even though they had spoken not 2 hours ago. "Hello, Kurama," Naruto replied. He too had joy in his voice, obviously happy to speak with his son once again. He found that, in a village full of those who hated him, speaking with his son was the one good thing he had. He would never be lonely, not as long as Kurama stayed by his side, stayed on his side. "You promised to tell me the tale of my father." His smile grew. He knew that his father was one of them, a shinobi, but apparently, and this was from his own son's mouth, Namikaze Minato was a pure, strong man who valued love and peace above all else. The Yondaime Hokage had been a man who wished for nothing but peace in a hate-filled world. His wish for peace did not only include Konoha, but that of all the nations, the world. He was a man who had killed many, but dreamt of a time where no one died by another's blade. A hero, a true, selfless hero, who believed his son would be the one to bring the peace he so craved. If he only knew how accurate he was. "While I was sealed within the woman who would become his wife, I only heard whispers of his name, occasionally leaving the tongues of those around her, her own tongue using his name." Kurama began the night's story, incredibly happy that he had this time. He had loved his father, more than his siblings, in his mind. They only had a short time with him, and then, like everything in the world, he was gone, choosing to let humanity live on their own. By the time she became his mate, he already had an incredible reputation. His father had been human, but the mortality of humanity meant nothing to someone with the power that rivaled the very gods that created him. He had been hurt that his father had left him, all alone in a world that saw him as nothing but hatred and a means to power. "I wasn't able to hear much, but what I did hear made me almost feel as if he was the one you spoke of that time." He had later decided that his father leaving was a good idea. The way things turned out, it was something that his father would feel heartache for. The world turned his gifts into weapons, and that, in his mind, was the greatest disrespect the world had ever shown. He had been particularly popular for his slaughter of an Iwa army. "Slaughter?" Naruto asked in a surprised voice, a frown marring his features. "I thought he was a hero, a peaceful man." He was a little confused. Kurama chuckled, his deep voice causing the cages that held him to shake. "He wished for peace, father." Kurama began. "But in a world like this, peace isn't really an actual option." Yes, it was for the better that his father had left, or he would have felt pain and despair that, when he even thought about his father feeling it, made Kurama angry enough to want to destroy the world entirely. There was a war, one of the world wars these shinobi have caused 3 times already. To save his people, his home, he had to go. Against everything he believed, everything he wished for. He had claimed to have hated humanity his entire life, but that was his biggest lie. His father was human, no matter how godlike he was, and when it came to love, his father had every last drop that was in his heart. In seconds, an army, 1,000 strong, fell by his blade. Naruto's eyes widened. He may have disliked it, but the mere idea, the mere thought that a man, without his eyes, could kill that many people in seconds was. It was somewhat terrifying. He was called a hero, the person who practically ended the war single-handedly. His father deserved to be worshipped, to be put upon a gilded throne for his sacrifices. Instead, he was betrayed and forgotten to become nothing but a legend, a fairy tale. It thoroughly angered him beyond belief. I, however, was able to hear his side of things, his take of his heroic deed on the warfront. Naruto had sat down, crossing his legs, getting comfortable, when his son began to spin his tail. He leaned in, his body already halfway inside the great gates that kept his son prisoner. "How did he feel, son?" Kurama took a second to feel the warm sensation he got in his stomach at being called son by the man he considered a father. He knew his father saw him, and all the Biju, as his children, but it always felt good to be reminded that you had a place in someone's heart, that you were loved. The Yondaime Hokage had gone to his wife afterwards, seeking to be consoled after losing one of his students. The pain of that loss obviously hurt him, but he managed to get through it with only shedding a single tear. He wished his father had everything he ever dreamed of, and now that he was back, he would help him with anything and everything he asked of him. His chakra. He considered it his father's anyways, he could have it, all of it. His loyalty. He didn't even have to ask, Kurama was loyal to only one being, and that being was the Rakuto Sennin. His love. He only loved his father, there wasn't room for anyone else. His everything belonged to his father, it always has, and it always will. But when he got around to talking about his awe-inspiring slaughter, he had done something my container, your mother, had never seen or heard before. His father may have a different form, but he knew, without a doubt, that this boy was the host of his father, the host of the most powerful man to walk the earth. He was Otsutsuki Hagoromo, no matter what name he took now. He cried. He cried for hours, shaking like a cold infant. He had been sick after what he had done. He was forced to take the lives of 1,000 men and women in a matter of seconds, all for the sake of peace for his home. Naruto's heart was heavy, his father becoming something of a personal hero in his mind. They were alike, he and his father. They did what they had to, for the sake of the better. He was only able to better his people, his village, but the fact that he wanted peace for all villages, for all people, it made Naruto proud to be the son of Namikaze Minato. Kurama was silent for a moment, letting his father think. The next day, your mother, Uzumaki Kushina, asked him a certain question that, even I have to admit, was unexpected. This was the answer that had him thinking that maybe, just maybe, this Namikaze Minato was his father's legacy. She asked if he had the chance to take it back, to never have done it, would he take it? It still made him chuckle softly to himself, not that anyone else but his father would know that. And he had said, with a determination as hot as the sun itself, that he would do it over and over again, for eternity even, if he had to. Because, as a shinobi, in the shinobi world, where the darkness prevails, there absolutely had to be a light, a hope that had to do what needed to be done, for the sake of not just one village but for the sake of all villages. He had believed that, with him sacrificing his soul, his beliefs and killing those shinobi, he had ended the war, the struggle, and hopefully that would save the lives of 100,000. He had believed that, with the deaths of those 1,000, and his beliefs, he had helped save all the nations from each other. At first, Kurama saw it as a foolish hero act, but after thinking about it, it made so much sense. He believed that, if he forfeited his personal peace, he could give peace to others. Tears ran down his small face. He was a hero. His voice was full of raw emotion. The pain, the sacrifice his father had to make because it was the only thing he could do in this dark, twisted shinobi world made him sick. And then, it made him furious. Naruto sighed, kicking a small rock with his foot as he walked to his home. He really disliked the council because, not only were they shinobi, but they had forced his father to make those hard decisions. It was the only way he could think of helping bring peace to the nations, and even though it was through the blood of thousands, Naruto had commended his father. It was no easy task. The shinobi world saw to that. He kept walking, his ringed eyes watching the burnt orange sky above him. He blamed his host for this completely, had an odd obsession with the color orange. He had almost bought this absolutely horrid orange jumpsuit, and his only reasons were that he really liked it. He had found himself doing that every so often. He would have these strange and very random instances of complete childish behavior or thoughts. Like, for instance, his desire to prank everyone who had even ever looked at him funny. He then would have to stop, take a deep breath, and remind himself that he was not the adult he thought he was. His body was still that of a 6-year-old, and no matter how old his soul was, he was still, technically, 6. He sighed. Oh, the struggles of being an all-powerful being reincarnated into an era that descended from his own by a little more than 1,000 years. That kind of made him chuckle. The mere thought was so absurd, unbelievable even, but nevertheless true. He spotted the rundown, aged building he called a home, causing him to sigh once again, shaking his head. His father had been the Yondaime Hokage, a man treasured by all of Hai no Kuni, so why was he living in a dump idiots like to call an apartment? He was beginning to think that everyone in Konoha was blind, because there was no way the entire village was that stupid. He opened his door, not bothering to lock it. No one even wanted anything to do with him in the streets, why would they want to break into his home? That manner of thought was crushed when, sitting at his makeshift kitchen table, was someone who hadn't been invited in. The older child turned to face him, his dark, onyx eyes meeting his ocean blues. Uzumaki Naruto, the boy with the shoulder-length, black hair began, I know who you are. Naruto was silent for a moment, and then, his face looked as if he had eaten something too sour. What he was witnessing was, in its most simplistic form, impossible. He had been assigned to the boy 2 months ago, and ever since then, he knew that there was something different about Uzumaki Naruto. Yes, his Rinnegan eyes were out of the norm. The sage's eyes should only have ever belonged to the sage, but that was in fact not the reason he believed the blonde was different. His whisker-like birthmarks, while also not of the norm, were not why he thought something was different about the child. No, these things were just physical, and he was fond of looking underneath the underneath. He found that, by finding what lay behind what was obvious, one could truly see the colors of another individual. Uzumaki Naruto was different because, no matter how much he watched, no matter how much he tried to learn, he could not figure the blonde out. No child, not even himself at that age, walked with that much, almost palpable, non-arrogant pride and confidence. Each step the boy took seemed to have purpose, like everything was important, every breath, every blink of the eye, everything. It was slightly hypnotizing, addicting, and so very absurd. Naruto was a 6-year-old boy. He shouldn't have the presence that outshined the Hokage. Yet, here he was, almost instinctively watching over his charge, not because he was ordered to, but that it was the right thing to do, the only thing to do. That's what led him here, in a very remote part of the village that was full of tree and bush, hidden away from the eyes of others. He was an Anbu operative, he was expected to know every inch of the village, and yet there still existed a place he had never seen. The person he was sworn to protect sat on the grassy ground, his purple, ringed eyes closed in intense concentration. He watched as the village Jinchuriki, that's what the people called him, brought his left hand up. He watched through crimson eyes as, with a sudden spike of chakra, the boy's left hand lit up in a red flame. The red was small in amount, but with his eyes he was able to decipher what it was. The red flame was pure, clean yin chakra, the likes of which should have been impossible to not only create, but manipulate at all. The small flame died down like a candle in the wind, receiving an irritated sigh from its creator. Concentrating again, this time raising his right hand, just like before, his hand lit into flame, this time blue. He was able to see it for what it was as well. The blue flame was yang chakra. And just like the time before, the flame died out, eliciting a small pout from the boy. He wasn't very close to the blonde, so when he began to speak to himself, who else could he have been talking to? He couldn't hear what was being said. He was only able to catch 2 words that left the boy's mouth. Normally, 2 words wouldn't be very significant at all. 2 words couldn't make up an entire sentence, or properly explain a situation, or do much of anything, really. 2 words, whispered into existence shouldn't have had such weight, such magnitude as the ones that left his charge's tongue. It was like they held power that no sentence, no actual complex speech could ever carry. His heart stopped when he heard these 2 words, these 2 living expressions. He couldn't be for sure, after all, it was an absolutely absurd, ridiculous theory. Such tales were that of children's stories, the kind that parents told before bed. He may be young, the youngest since the legend that is Hitaki Kakashi, but he was no innocent, ignorant child. He prided himself on knowing history, and not only that of his village, but of the world. His insight, his bigger picture, didn't just include Konohagakure. He knew his village was just as guilty of the horrendous monstrosities shinobi tend to force upon others. It was all in the name of peace and patriotic duty, but to what end? He was able to study the histories of the world, able to see both sides of the conflict, and what he saw scarred him. He had been traumatized with the horrors of the Third Shinobi World War. And contrary to his family's beliefs, it wasn't just because of the casualties of the Konoha-born. The mangled, shredded bodies of the enemies brought back as trophies and claims to fame through conquest were just as bad. The men they brought back were someone's son, someone's family. The women were someone's daughter, someone's kin. It hurt his heart just as bad to see their lifeless corpses. That had been when he decided. He had come to the conclusion that, even if many would disagree, peace would be impossible for the shinobi world. War, famine, death, lust, gluttony, greed, these were only a few of the things that the shinobi world caused on a daily basis, and no one short of the Rakudo Sennin himself could change all of that. He himself was a prime example of how cruel and ugly the shinobi world was. He was a pacifist, a loving child who wanted nothing but peace and understanding. Yet, he was cursed with prodigious talent for the shinobi arts. He was cursed with the ability to take lives with ease, an experienced veteran had at an early age. He had advanced through the shinobi ranks faster than any of his generation, rivaled only by his best friend, his brother figure. His body was almost tailored for the life of an assassin, the life of a killer, a murderer. He hated his so-called talents, his so-called genius. He had thought that nothing would change. The cycle of hatred he knew existed would continue in a never-ending loop forever as long as shinobi ruled the nations. But when he heard those two words leave the blonde, Rinnegan-wielding boy's mouth, he suddenly had hope once again. He suddenly felt as if the never-ending cycle of hatred, the never-ending bloodshed shinobi brought upon the world like a plague could end. He needed to know more. He needed to study, to be absolutely positive before he confronted this. Those two words were all it took for the weasel-masked Anbu operative to regain his hope for the world. He would forever remember those two words that he was able to hear. Banbutsu Sozo. After studying the Uchiha documents, what little we still have of you, I had my answer, my confirmation. Uchiha Itachi said. He was sitting with the blonde, a cup of steaming tea in his hands. You are the Rakudo Sennin. I know you are. He paused, his eyes akin to desperation. You have to be. Naruto stared at one of his eldest son's descendants, a stoic, almost cold expression on his face. He allowed the boy to speak, wanting to hear what absurd acquisition he had come up with. Now, however, he was a little surprised. He never thought that someone, anyone, could share his thoughts on the shinobi world. This boy, this Uchiha Itachi, was just like his father, just like Namikaze Minato, a single, solitary light that shined in the darkness that was the shinobi world. And if I was this man, the sage reincarnated, what would you have me do? He asked. He was curious. Itachi wore his stoic expression, his onyx eyes never leaving the purple ones. He was silent, thinking over his answer carefully. He then sighed. What I want does not matter. Naruto raised a curious eyebrow. What the world needs is someone to save it from this curse. Naruto smirked. And what is this so-called curse that the world desperately needs saving from? He asked, already knowing the answer. Shinobi, Itachi answered without pause, what the world needs to be saved from is shinobi. Naruto smiled. He stood and crossed the distance to Itachi. He put a small hand on the boy's shoulder and nodded. Okay, he began, you are right. He admitted. I am the person you believe me to be. Itachi's heart felt lighter the second that sentence left his mouth, even though he had known for weeks. And I will save this world from the shinobi who plague it, he smirked, on one condition. Itachi looked at the blonde in confusion. He would only save the planet on a condition. Was this truly the Rakudo Sennin? You help me save it. Naruto finished. Itachi's face went back to its normal stoic expression, until a rare smirk crossed his face. He nodded. Hi, Sennin-sama, Itachi replied. Two of the world's most peaceful men had just joined forces, ready to start their mission. Whether it be world peace, or world domination, still remained to be seen, for neither knew what would truly save it. But they would figure it out, together. Naruto had just recently turned 7. It had been 6 months since he and Itachi met, and a lot had happened since then. One of the biggest changes was the fact that Naruto no longer looked at ninjutsu as a hideous disfigurement. Itachi had made sure of that. Apparently, the godlike man, or was he a child, judged the ninja techniques too soon. He only had a basic knowledge of ninjutsu, and while refusing to join the academy was, at least in his mind, a smart idea, he had limited his learning ability. Itachi decided to correct that, teaching him everything there was to know about the art of shinobi techniques. Apparently, and this had even brought a small smile to his face, there was the creation of Iryo ninjutsu, medical ninjutsu. Itachi explained it as a branch of ninjutsu that was associated with healing, something used by medical nin. That had been the day he had decided that it wasn't ninjutsu that was corrupt, it was the shinobi that used it. Ninjutsu was just an inevitable evolution, a secondary means of understanding the world, a lesser, more complicated and confusing means, but a means nonetheless. Itachi had helped him look at it in a more logical, albeit somewhat figurative, way. He started to look at ninjutsu as the assassin's blade, not the assassin. It was the effect, not the cause, and he was a little embarrassed that he hadn't seen it from the beginning. With his logic, the Jinchuriki, though he still very much loathed the title, were the Biju they housed, not separate, sentient beings of life. That line of thought caused him to sigh. He really needed to start his journey. He missed the rest of his children, and even though they didn't know he was back amongst them, they were still waiting for him, waiting to be saved, ready to be freed. It's not going to be that bad, kid. The Anbu, he had called them the Zoo, a fitting name for such a ridiculous organization, that was wearing a white, porcelain mask that some would say resembled a cat. He huffed. This situation was all wrong. He hadn't sighed for his current dilemma, nor had he huffed for her try at relaxing him, if it could be called that. He had sighed because he missed his caged, imprisoned, mistreated, misunderstood, beautiful children. And he huffed because there was no way in hell that this purple-haired lady's mask resembled a cat. And if anyone claimed he lacked imagination, he would promptly point to the sky, shouting, "I created the one thing that was direly needed for the night time, the moon, you moronic mortal." Of course, he would never say that. For one, he, no matter how powerful he knew he was, considered himself human, even though human and mortal meant two very different things. If he were to imply that he was not mortal, the mortals would title him as something divine, something not human, and that would do nothing but upset him. Another reason was that he wasn't a hateful, brash person. He would never take his irritation out on another, no matter how good it sounded. He was a priest, a sage, he needed to have self-control lest he wanted to accidentally lash out at someone and end an innocent life. "I know, Neko-san," Naruto replied. He wasn't at all nervous or anxious about this so-called great meeting. The fire daimyo was just another ordinary, unimpressive man before the first human born able to wield chakra. It wasn't arrogance or cockiness that made him see it as so, it was fact. He didn't look down on people because he chose to, but what else was a giant supposed to do with mice? Neko didn't reply, not that it mattered to him much, and the two walked in a comfortable silence. The Anbu operative, such an official-sounding title, came to him a little over 4 minutes ago. Apparently, the fire daimyo had finally decided to grace Konohagakure no Sato with his presence, and Naruto had to drop everything he was doing, which was speaking with his only friend of this era, Uchiha Itachi, in his home, and show up for some meeting that was supposed to decide the fate of his shinobi career. He never before thought the people of the village were so stupid. They actually believed they could force him to do anything. The very thought made him scoff. He hadn't been sitting around, idly chit-chatting with Itachi for 6 months. He had been training, growing stronger, both physically and spiritually. His eyes were maturing much faster than they had in his first life. Whether that was due to his past experience or his new body's almost scary compatibly with just about everything. He had discovered, and this had really shocked him, that his new body was even more compatible with his children than his past body was. His chakra and very soul could resonate with Biju chakra. It was spectacular, he could be with his children on a level they couldn't reach before. Once they were back with him, safe and sound, they would enter that plane of existence together. "We are here, Uzumaki-san," Neko announced when they came to the Hokage Tower that stood next to the Shinobi Academy. "You may enter, they have been waiting for you," she said. She bowed her head a little, a polite gesture that surprised him. Most people disliked him for what was inside him, to find one that was not blind was refreshing. "Hi," he returned the gesture, nodding his head, "Thank you, Neko-san." With one last nod, the cat-faced operative vanished in a swirl of wind and leaves. Naruto sighed, pushing the door of the tower open, taking a step into the building with slight annoyance. This was a waste of his time. He had no interest in shinobi matters, or politics for that matter, and he wasn't going to forsake his beliefs after one little insignificant meeting with one little insignificant man. These people saw themselves as much more than they actually were. They were not the kings of the land, the top dogs of the world. What they were corrupt thinkers, men, if they could be called as such, and women who preyed on the weak and shrouded the world with darkness and misery. He took a deep breath, ridding his mind of such bitter, resent-filled thoughts. He took his second step in the building, and then a third, a fourth, and so on and so forth. He walked in a leisurely pace, making his way through the building to where he knew these so-called high-ranking officials waited for him. He couldn't help but wonder if these people thought they knew even a fraction of the power he possessed. Would they still act as if they owned him? Would they still walk around as if he belonged to them, and his life could, and would, be decided by their hand? It was almost so amusing that he thought about showing them the true, raw power his eyes possessed. He knew what the plan for today was, but he disliked it. He wasn't fond of deceit or secrecy unless it was for the actual greater good, his identity being one of those times, and he knew that this was in fact another one of those instances, but he still disliked. It was, however, crucial to their plan, and he would not risk his children's happiness over his own beliefs. That was something he would not do. His children came first, no exceptions. That, too, made him smile. He was in fact his father's child. He turned a corner, his famed eyes roaming the hall before him. The walls were a tannish white, the floor brown, and the lights an almost yellow. All in all, it was an average hallway, decorated with pictures of famous ninja that had sacrificed their lives, and the lives of others, he might add, to save their village. He shook his head. His father had been the one case, the one exception where bloodshed had been the right, and only, way to peace. There were no other alternatives for him, and he hadn't been proud of the massacre he was praised for. It was an ugly, heartbreaking necessity, one not made without proper thought of all other options. He came to a stop at a large, ornate door. He took a moment to calm his mind, readying himself, before knocking. He waited a few moments before the door opened, a man with gruff features, shoulder-length, black hair and an unlit cigarette within his mouth greeting him. "Oh, so you're Uzumaki Naruto," the man said neutrally. "Daimyo-sama, the boy is here." The man who was wearing what looked to be either civilian clothes or really unprotected shinobi gear said. As he turned, Naruto caught sight of the white cloth that hung from his waist with the kanji for fire on it. "Asuma-san, let the boy in," a voice from inside the room called out. The newly named Asuma gave a sheepish expression, turning so that Naruto could actually enter. "Sorry about that, kid." Asuma apologized. Naruto just nodded, not really giving the thought that someone literally 1,000 years younger than him called him a kid. Entering the room, Naruto was greeted by multiple eyes of every color. The usually large meeting room looked small with all the people who crowded it, attending only to see the Rinnegan child. That's what people began calling him, like he was nothing but the worth of his eyes. Shinobi tended to only crave power, not the force that harnessed said power. If someone had something that you wanted, you took it from them, as was the norm for the shinobi world. It was filthy and sickening. "Naruto-kun." The Hokage greeted the boy with a small, sad smile, not looking forward to the coming storm of conversations. Naruto nodded back, a small smile of his own on his face. That was another thing that changed during the 6 months. He had gotten closer to the Hokage, which, in hindsight, was a very strange thing. The Hokage was a leader of the very thing he despised, shinobi. Not only did he lead them, he was in fact one of them, an old one that had committed the very dark acts that hurt his heart. But, there was something different about the Sandaime as well. He wished for peace, but not out of innate pureness, but out of painful experience. He had seen with his very eyes, done with his very hands, the deeds that fueled the circle of hatred. He was tired of all the hate, all the loss. Sarutobi Hiruzen wanted peace. Unfortunately, the shinobi world they lived in would have none of that talk. "So this is the child, is it?" An old, unimpressive man asked in a shrill voice. "Ah, I see the famed eyes." He squealed in childish delight. "Tell me, child, what do you think about your own gift from the gods?" he asked, his voice somewhat annoying and displeasing to the ears. He wore the robes of the fire daimyo, the ruler of Hai no Kuni. Even the great Konohagakure no Sato belonged to him, so, in the shinobi world, he was a powerful figure. It was just as absurd as the thought of people who were treated harshly obeying every word of the very people who despised them. He was a man with about as much prowess as a child, yet he was called powerful. He relied on the strength of others, yet he was called a king. No, he was no king. He had met actual kings, good and bad. Kings fought, they conquered. Naruto chuckled. This fire daimyo was more like the court jester, a comical joke of a man. "I value my eyes, but I do not think they make me anything more than any other person." His eyes gave him the power to fall nations in a blink. he was reminded of his father, and make it look like child's play. He could literally, if he so chose, destroy the entire planet, or enslave it for that matter, with a single blink, or at least he could before he departed. Of course, he'd have to train more, mature his eyes more, before he could amount to that once again, but it was only a matter of time. The so-called powerful man jumped up in his luxurious chair a little, like that of a child seeing a toy they wished to have, and giggled. "Ah, such a humble boy," he finally shouted. He giggled some more again, before finally asking another question. "And why, oh humble child, do you see yourself that way?" he asked in utter excitement. When the creator of Ninshu had originally walked the earth, he had never been a selfish man. He was always fair, even if he had the power not to be. He believed that if you abused the power that you had, corruption would take a hold of you. Arrogance and a lust for even more power was all that waited at the end of that tunnel. And your inevitable downfall would come soon after. Even now, in this era where selfishness and abusing one's power was the status quo, he kept his beliefs strong. Seeing himself as better than another human being was a catalyst, a path that led to the practices of the shinobi ways. In this way of thought, the answer was so very simple. "I do not wish to become like you," he said, receiving a confused look from the daimyo, a greedy, lustful man who cares for nothing but power. He answered honestly. Another man wearing expensive-looking robes shot to his feet, a seer on his face. "How dare you!" he shouted, taking a breath to scream again. He was stopped, however, when the daimyo raised his hand, cutting the man short. "Ah, Michi-san, please, let the boy speak his mind." He then began to giggle again. "Please, do elaborate, Naruto-kun." He gestured with his hand, rather extravagantly, to continue. Naruto sighed. He was confused with the man's odd behavior. He further explained nevertheless. "If history has proven anything, besides that humanity cannot keep peace, is that every king has fallen, every grand nation has crumbled, sooner or later." The fire daimyo nodded, signaling that he understood so far. The reason for this is simplistic in nature, but it is always the truth, always the reason. Again, the daimyo nodded, allowing him to continue. At some point, either the nation, or the king, or both, begin to crave more. What they have begins to become not enough, and that is the genesis of their downfall. The man who he was summoned to speak with took a moment, thinking his words over, before nodding. The lust, the want for more, even though what was perfectly enough, is the spark that always sends the great kingdoms into oblivion. The fire daimyo giggled, and Naruto decided that he rather disliked the shrill noise. "Ah, so you base your humbleness on the historic theory that hunger falls kings." He giggled again, giving him a look that made him a little uncomfortable. "Are you implying that you are a king, Naruto-kun?" he asked in a high, pitchy voice that said he thought he just spoke a hook, line, and sinker. Naruto sighed. "It is the very reason you believe I see myself as a king that I do not wish to be like you," he replied. The man gave him a questioning look, so he explained further. "Your power-hungry mind looks for more power, whether it be in the physical world, or even in speech patterns, you look for it, even if it is on a subconscious level." He didn't care that he was supposed to be a 7-year-old right now. This conversation, no matter how much he would like to deny it, would decide his future. "I hadn't implied, even in the slightest, that I see myself as a king. But your reasoning behind your answer was that a king, or nation, falls for its lust for more. How can't you see why it would seem?" He was stopped when he saw the blonde-haired boy shake his head, chuckling. "That's just it, you took my example at face value. You didn't even try to understand the true meaning behind it." He sighed. "The meaning wasn't to compare myself to a king, but to explain to a man who sees himself as king that his craving for power that doesn't belong to him could be the end of him." Michi, the stout man that stood and yelled at him before, once again stood, pointing an accusing finger at him. "Is that a threat, boy?" he shouted. He then turned to the Hokage. "Hokage Dono, you should tighten the leash around your pet, before he pushes his luck." Hiruzen narrowed his eyes, angry at the fact that he could do nothing for the man's hateful, distasteful words. Leash. That was a snide remark that referred to his son, his caged, imprisoned, hurt son. That was another word that he absolutely loathed. He was so upset that he couldn't do anything but chuckle. He chuckled at the fact that he could end the man's life, even with his power not at its complete strength, and how very easy it would be. He chuckled at the fact that, once his children were with him, they would help him decide the fate of everyone. He also chuckled at the fact that he was not a man, or child, that killed because he was offended verbally. Daimyo, Naruto began, not bothering with adding any form of honorific. This meeting was to discuss something you wanted to propose, right? He asked, suggesting that he wanted the conversation to be over as quickly as possible. After getting over the shock of the boy's words, which actually made sense, he went back to his annoying self. Ah, yes, he giggled, Naruto-kun, I understand that you do not wish to join the Shinobi Academy in Konoha. Naruto gave a short nod, allowing the man to continue. Ah, yes, well, he began, I would like to formally invite you to join. Naruto held up a hand, stopping the man. Whatever you are offering, I respectably decline. He said. Hiruzen sighed, he knew this was going to happen. I've actually decided to become a shinobi. He stated, causing the Hokage's eyes to widen. Naruto turned to the aged Sarutobi. Hokage-sama, he added the honorific, knowing that it wouldn't really bother the daimyo, but Michi. I will join the shinobi ranks, on one condition. He held up a single finger. Hiruzen blinked a few times before clearing his throat. And what is the condition, Naruto-kun? He asked. The fire daimyo was speechless, hanging his head down to pout childishly for not getting what he wanted. No matter how much power he figuratively possessed, he could not force a person born in Konoha to join his bodyguards. It was the one rule he had to follow. He wasn't a fool, which would have shocked anyone that had ever met him. He knew how the deal with his shinobi village worked. They let him make it look like he was the top dog if he provided them with proper funds. In return, they'd protect him and his capital, a win-win for everyone. So now that the boy was crying shinobi, he no longer was able to claim him. Naruto smirked before answering the question with a name. Uchiha Itachi. Naruto began. I will become a shinobi as long as Uchiha Itachi is my sensei. Yes, he very much disliked deceit. Hiruzen was silent for a moment, his analytical mind going through multiple scenarios at the speed that would make Inara blush. After a good minute of thinking, he asked his question. And why do you specifically request Uchiha Itachi? He knew that Itachi was one of his most loyal, not to mention talented, operatives, but the whole Uchiha crisis caused his old, tired mind to be wary. Naruto took in a deep breath, closing his eyes. This change that occurred within the last 6 months had surprised him the most. While sparring with Itachi, he asked to see the young ANB use dojutsu, knowing it to be a power Indra was born with. He knew it to be a power of darkness. To gain the awesome abilities the Sharingan was capable of, one had to suffer much loss. Itachi, like always, did as he was asked, and activated the curse of his clan. The moment the purple, ringed Rinnegan eyes met the crimson, three-tomo Sharingan, something within the blonde, awoke. A sharp, breathtaking pain had overtaken Naruto, and his eyes burned like the sun. The pain lasted only for a second, and when he had finally been able to open his eyes, Itachi had dropped to his knees, his arms going limp, and tears falling from his now black orbs. When Naruto had opened his eyes, Itachi had seen the, in a single word, impossible. The world had only seen these eyes twice before, and each time, the world feared their wielder. With these eyes, the mountains would move when told to move. With these eyes, the waters would part when told to part. With these eyes, the gods themselves shook in fear. All these things were true when these eyes gazed upon the mortal world. Naruto opened his eyes. The occupants of the room stood, their shock written all over their faces, their minds a jumbled mess. Silence. The Rinnegan, the Samsara eyes, were said to be the greatest of all dojutsu, the most powerful eyes to ever exist. This, however, was not the case. What trickery is this? Michi, a man Naruto began to believe was good for nothing but annoying him, shouted. Staring back at the self-proclaimed kings of the country, a Rinnegan with 9 tomos sitting on its rings, 3 per ripple, held amusement. Uchiha Itachi is my friend, and I need to be taught how to use the Sharingan. His voice held his amusement, but just barely. The Rinne Sharingan had returned and they obeyed Uzumaki Naruto now. The eyes of God stared back at mere men, mere mortals. A true king was amongst the peasants, not that he saw it as that. He was just a man, a boy. A virtually indestructible, immortal, omnipotent man, but a man nonetheless. The devil's hands have been busy, the daimyo whispered, his entire body feeling numb at seeing. What was it he was seeing? That is my condition, Hokage-sama. Naruto continued. Uchiha Itachi, no one else. Having to learn how to use the Sharingan was a little white lie that was necessary, but it still was something that he very much disliked. He was a man of his word. Lying and secrecy was an annoying fact of life in this era, a fact that even he could not avoid. He was doing it for the betterment of the world, of his children and family, but it still made him uncomfortable. That he was apparently good enough to lie straight to the faces of trained shinobi was as disconcerting as it was comical. In his past life, his third eye held the Rinne Sharingan, and he was very capable of using its abilities, having created his son's greatest technique, but chose not to rely on them. They were not a power to be used without caution. He was a firm believer that abuse of power led to arrogance and the downfall of more humans than he was willing to admit. Hiruzen gulped, shaking his head to clear his mind. The eyes he was looking at, they were not of this world. Hi, Naruto-kun, the Sandaime began, I agree to your terms. He signaled someone unknown with his left hand, his fingers forming strange signs. In less than 2 seconds and a blink of an eye, someone from the zoo was at the aged man's side. As he began to speak with the operative silently, the blonde let the tomo that sat on the rings of his Rinnegan fade, not needing those eyes. Those eyes, they were meant for domination, absolute, inescapable world domination. A chill ran down his back, and his heart suddenly felt heavy. He might have to use those eyes for this incorrigible shinobi world, and that was almost too much weight for his already heavy shoulders. The way things were looking, absolute subjugation through massive amounts of subterfuge and, for lack of a better word, bullying, was the only way to save the world from its worst enemy. Humanity. Naruto panted. His small, child body was not used to such physical workouts. Itachi was currently pushing his body to the absolute limits. If he wasn't a Jinchuriki, and an Uzumaki to boot, which apparently made him an endurance monster, he probably would have collapsed by now from fatigue. Taijutsu was what this era dubbed martial arts are, the optimization of natural human abilities. By accessing one's physical and mental energies, which relied heavily on stamina and strength gained through vigorous training, one could execute body techniques. Naruto had never really trained his previous body in martial arts, not having to rely on his own body too much when it came to his battles. His eyes were always more than enough to get the job done. Itachi, however, convinced him that in a world where people could move faster than sound and demolish mountains with a single punch, he was sure that Senju Tsunade was Suki's descendant, that having knowledge and experience with taijutsu would come in handy. He was no longer in a world where the very whisper of his name sent the Shinigami himself running in fear. He was someone else, in a very different world. He would have to show the world who he was, gain that incredible status once again. That thought caused him to chuckle softly. He had sent kings fleeing, tyrants and pirates alike scurrying, and the gods themselves kept their distance. He was not an overly proud man, or arrogant in any meaning of the word, but even he had to admit that he was a man both respected and feared by the entire world. It was somewhat annoying that he was seen as nothing but a child now. Ah well, he'd just have to remind the kings, the tyrants, the pirates and gods who he was, and why he was not a man to be trifled with. He would save the world. He would save his children. He would do all these things, he swore. He was Uzumaki Naruto, the Rakudo Sennin, and he never broke his promises. So here he was practicing the god-awful kata Itachi said was perfect for him. Apparently, Itachi had a sense of humor, because naming the tailor-made taijutsu the Sennin no Mai was just too much for it not to be a crack at him. Sennin-sama, Itachi suddenly said, stopping the light spar, let's take a break. Naruto sighed, thankful for the much-needed break. He was a stamina tank, but he was still 7. He took a seat on the ground, his eyes gazing at the moon, which was slowly rising as the sun was setting. It was a beautiful sight, and Naruto decided to share it. Itachi, he began, sit with me, little dragon. That was something he started calling Itachi, little dragon. He was an Uchiha, a fire breather. They were a clan of powerful, mighty dragons, their hearts ablaze with the will of fire he's heard so much about. Itachi had spoken about the curse of hatred, something that seemed to plague the clan. Naruto had immediately dismissed that theory. There was no such thing as a curse of hatred. It wasn't possible, since, even as individuals, the Uchiha were the most loving people the world had ever seen. They were his descendants, and he refused to believe that his children, the Senju and Uchiha, were born with hatred. Hatred was akin to a parasite. It needed a living host, and would continue to derive nutrients at the host's expense. No, the Uchiha were not born hateful, they just had the unfortunate capability of loving with all of their hearts, not just a part of it. Once that love was lost or taken from them, love would become hate, and hate would come at the fall of the hateful. Itachi didn't move for a moment, until he gave a small smile and did as he was told. He knew what was coming. This was what the young Uchiha waited for, craved for. He loved history, of any kind, and what better history was there than the history of the Rakuto Sennin? After long training sessions, Naruto would thank him with a tale that would blow the Uchiha's mind. The life of the Sage of Six Paths was by far the most amazing fable. Every memory held such importance. His every step molded the world, changed it, and with every word the blonde held his attention, every wave of his hand surprising him, being so captured by the stories being told. The words that left the tongue of the younger boy held more value than gold, than village secrets, than everything. They were in a smaller training ground, and Uchiha owned one that only Itachi ever used. They had been there for hours already, and it had been like that since the meeting with the Fire Daimyo a week ago. He was becoming a shinobi, and Itachi was his personal sensei. It was uncommon for shinobi to be given this type of attention before they even became a genin, but not unheard of. Most of the times this happened, though, was through a family member who was already in the shinobi ranks. But when you possess a Rinnegan, and a new form of Sharingan to boot, you got certain advantages. Yes, he was training in certain shinobi fields, but he was not going to actually become a shinobi. He would not sink into the corruption that followed said lifestyle. Itachi moved with purpose, lying down next to the person he called friend, eager to listen. And listen he did. Tsukuyomi, Naruto began, was the most beautiful goddess I have ever laid eyes on. That one sentence caused the stoic, calm Uchiha to shoot upright, eyes wide. Why you met the moon goddess? He asked in shock. Naruto chuckled. His eyes closed, a look of pleasant reminiscence on his face. I didn't just meet her, my little dragon, Naruto began, smirking. This would be amusing, he decided. I married her, and she mothered my children. Itachi froze. Two figures walked side by side, their long, white kimonos flirting with the earth they walked on. To the right, a tall man with shoulder-length, pale red hair stood, a black, dual-headed shikuho in his right hand, one end with the typical ringed hoop, the other a crescent-shaped curve. His back was decorated with a large red Rinnegan-like marking with a pattern of 9 red magatama arranged in 3 rows of 3 beneath it. He walked with near hypnotizing purpose, and the very air around him seemed cleaner, purer. To the left, a similarly tall man with long, white hair stood, a sheathed sword on his hip and a shikuho in his left hand. His every step was that of a noble, the very ground under his feet almost thankful to be stepped on. The two young men walked towards the fiery sun, their minds made. They were needed in the northeast, so that's where they were headed. The two walked in the most comfortable silence, the very surrounding nature seeming to silence in their presence, not out of fear, but out of respect. They wore stoic expressions, walking calmly to their destination. They had been walking before the sun began to rise, and they would most likely be walking long after it sets. There was work to be done, and it was of great importance. Suddenly, they both stopped, feeling it before it actually appeared. A bright, incredibly powerful light shot down from the sky. It hit the earth, and didn't disappear for a good 5 seconds. The earth was torn apart from the blast, and shook from its force. The impact was hard enough to disturb the almost religious silence nature was showing the two figures. As the light faded, and the silence began to return, the long-haired man spoke, his very voice carrying more elegance and nobility than 10 kings. Ah, Ni-san, it looks like they've sent another. Neither moved, nor even bothered to pay attention to the form that had come from the extremely powerful light, seemingly from the heavens. It would seem so. The second man sighed. He was a man of peace, and his brother was no different, why couldn't they see that? He actually looked sad, like it hurt him. The man with long, white hair was the first to meet the eyes of the newcomer. Her lavender eyes met his featureless white orbs. He glanced at his brother, noticing the saddened look on his face and narrowed his eyes, turning back to the intruder. His brother was a great man, someone who healed and asked for nothing, someone who gave and never took. He was a bringer of peace, and the fact that these arrogant, asinine, egotistical pests couldn't see that somewhat angered him. A form came from the light, a woman, with light blonde hair and lavender eyes, garbed in a white kimono, similar to theirs. She was nowhere as tall as either of them, but the aura she radiated was no less palpable. An aura of superiority the likes of which almost seemed to surpass the furious look on her otherwise breathtakingly beautiful features had the short-haired man most curious. She looked at him, the short-haired man, and snarled. Her lavender eyes met his purple, ringed eyes that gave him powers he wasn't supposed to possess. He was mortal, a no function but to destroy human, and her people were not happy that such prowess was given to one so unworthy. Their horns could not fool her, or her people. They were human, no matter how divine they may look. She opened her mouth to speak, and speak she did. Otsutsuki Hagoromo, the Rinnegan is not a power mere mortals should be in possession of. She said bluntly and to the point. Forfeit what does not belong to you, or I shall make you give up what is not yours. What had transpired next happened in the blink of an eye, faster for even someone like her to not react fast enough. The white-haired man, planting his black shakuho in the ground, vanished, a loud booming noise coming from the action. He had broken the sound barrier with frightening ease. Suddenly, and without warning, the horned, pale-eyed man was face to face with the woman who dared to speak to his brother like a peasant, his blade poised and already swinging at her in a mighty arc. Then, the most powerful man spoke, his whisper of a voice carrying more strength than 10 nations. Hamura. The simple call of his brother's name was enough to stop the powerful man mid-swing. Otsutsuki Hamura, still wearing his ever-stoic expression, turned his blade and instead swiped at the air to the left of the woman, and again, he vanished. The moment he appeared next to his brother, Hamura was already sheathing his blade. Before he could completely sheath it, though, the woman smirked. Ah, the mighty Hamura still does as he's told by his brother who's not 5 minutes older than he. Hamura did not respond to this, instead just sheathing his sword with an audible click. And with the click, the mass of trees that was to the woman's left, where the man she had just mocked swung. His famed sword, split like paper. Miles of forest was cut clean with a single swing. To her credit, the woman didn't show her nervousness, nothing but a bead of sweat falling from her brow. But that was enough for Hamura, his eyes able to see everything, from her fast heartbeat to her lungs inhaling and exhaling oxygen at a quickened pace. Good. She now knew her place. What is your name, Goddess San? Otsutsuki Hagoromo, a man of power and peace, asked. His politeness and willingness to speak was appreciated by the woman. She had obviously underestimated Hamura, and that was her very first mistake. His brother, even without the Rinnegan, was a man that could even face him on equal ground. And his skill with a sword was rivaled by none. I am Tsukuyomi, she replied. Hagoromo was actually surprised. He never thought he'd meet the goddess his mother named her ultimate techniques after. Ah, the reality bender. He replied, smiling. It is a pleasure to meet you, Tsukuyomi-san. He said as he lowered his head a little out of respect for the beautiful woman. Even without a domain, you are highly respected, both in humanity's eyes and the divine hierarchy. His powerful, feared eyes met her lavender ones, a small smile on her face. No matter what her dislikes were with him, a compliment from the legendary priest was something very appreciated by anyone who was given one. Flattery will get you nowhere, Hagoromo-san. She decided to add the honorific since he was being so polite, not wanting to be shown up by a human. You will hand over those eyes. Hagoromo closed his eyes, a small smile on his face. Polite manners, not flattery, Tsukuyomi-san, he replied. And I'm most curious as to why you and your people believe my eyes do not belong to me. He said. His voice was still calm, and neither man showed too much emotion, their faces ever stoic. Those eyes are divine, and they do not belong to mortals. Life and death are powers that cause catastrophe when in your kind's hands. She said truthfully. Your mother is proof enough of that. Thus, her second mistake. My mother does not represent all of humanity, just as you do not represent all deities. It is a narrow-minded, and to be honest, moronic way of thought. Hamura answered. His family meant everything to him, more than anything else, and he would not have others judge or claim to know what they clearly did not. And I will only say this once, he continued, the veins around his eye sockets bulging, never speak of my mother again, or I'll cut your tongue out, vermin. Hamura was a little overprotective. Calm, brother, Hagoromo whispered, seemingly relaxing the angered man with his voice alone. But he is right, Tsukuyomi-san. His eyes met hers. Leave our mother's name out of your mouth. He paused, letting the words sit before he gave her a small smile, please. The two of you speak as if you can command me. The supposed goddess proclaimed with narrowed eyes. You are but hairless apes, she snarled, know your place. With that said, the reality bender shot off, an almost purple-pink after-image following her. She raised her arm and beams, the same color as her after-image, shot from her body, rushing at the man who stole God's eyes. When the beams of pure chakra and life energy came within inches of the holy man's flesh, they suddenly stopped, only to begin shrinking, being absorbed into Hagoromo's body by the Preta path. Even the gods couldn't scar him. Tsukuyomi sighed. I was hoping to do this the easy way. She shook her head. But like all humans, you can't see the bigger picture of things. She sighed again, this time dramatically. And here I thought the great priest of the six paths was a reasonable and intelligent man. Hagoromo just smiled softly at the woman. Intelligent. Fairly. Reasonable. On occasion. He chuckled softly to himself. As for this bigger picture, it's not about who can and can't see it. Hamura allowed himself a small smile, already hearing this from his wise brother. It's about who can comprehend it. He smiled again. The straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. The air became heavy, the peaceful aura vanishing. Tsukuyomi's lavender eyes darkened to a deep purple, her very skin seemingly falling upwards towards the heavens, only leaving purple skin bright enough to blind some. A halo hovered over her head, almost pink hair standing, resembling wings. And then, the angelic form before them smiled. It was something that befitted a demon, not a divine entity. Such a foolish human, to act as if he is smarter than a goddess, she started. I will have those eyes, she snarled, the eyes you used to kill my brother. The goddess in her true god form blasted off at the brothers who would later slay God, rage-filled eyes narrowed in total righteous fury. Hamura looked to his brother, a sorrowful expression on his face. The deity had just brought up one of the few things that his brother actually regretted. It broke his heart to have to do what he did, but he had to do it. It was not done lightly, but out of necessity. He had to kill the great storm of summer. He had to kill Susanoo. Instead of an angry look of denial, Tsukuyomi came face to face with a mournful one, tears falling silently to the ground. She didn't stop. The second her energy-covered fist was about to make contact with his face, Hagoromo's eyes snapped onto her, the rings of his eyes almost bulging. Hamura took a step back. The gods were about to duel. It was an impossible absurdity. He was not human. He couldn't be. She was sure. She panted, her sore body exhausted beyond anything she had ever felt before. She could hardly breathe. Her bones ached and her muscles screamed. She had near infinite chakra, much more than her siblings, yet, she could hardly feel what was left. Was there anything left? She was alive, for now, so she must have some chakra. She tried to raise her head. She just laid there, not even able to raise her own head. This was pathetic, mortifying on a level she never knew existed. A human? No, that's wrong. He was not human. He was something else, transcended. He beat her down, he crushed her with such power she had actually been frightened by. He scared her. If she could, she would chuckle. She was proud of herself. Even without looking, she knew what was there. The surrounding, as far as the eye could see, and considering who was around at the time, that was extremely far, was scarred, flattened, razed. They probably split the country in two, maybe not that bad, but she had never seen so much destruction, so much carnage. She had lasted 3 days. She was able to stand against the great priest for 3 days. Even if she didn't even scratch his skin, she had lasted for 3 days, and that in itself, to her, was the only kind of victory anyone who fought the holy man could attain. His shadow announced him, his passive and untired face soon staring at her from above. She looked at him with something akin to acceptance. She did not fear him anymore. Why would she? There was nothing she could do. Fear was an annoyingly human emotion, so she discarded it after realizing that Otsutsuki Hagoromo was even more powerful than she. Are you going to kill me now, too? Like you murdered my brother? She asked in a tired voice, more of a whisper than anything. The pain that entered the god-man's eyes confused her. Tsukuyomi, the dropping of sand from her name was noticed. I did not wish to kill Susanoo. Then, why did you? She screamed, not caring enough to hold the tears in anymore. You took him away from us. Hagoromo wouldn't allow his eyes to leave hers. It seemed it was time to tell her. Susanoo lost his mind when his wife was killed. He suddenly said. Tsukuyomi's eyes narrowed. He became insane, going into a killing frenzy for 5 days. He sighed at the goddess's disbelieving look. He killed thousands of people, Tsukuyomi. Thousands of innocent men, women and children lost their lives to his broken self. Liar. The goddess shouted, refusing to meet his truthful gaze. It's the truth. Hamura began. Nisan and I tried to convince him to stop, even offered him our help. The younger of the twins huffed. The fool waited for my back to be turned to strike me like a coward. He continued, not really caring about the woman's feelings. He was killed trying to take my life. He was rabid, a mindless husk of his former self. Hagoromo finally allowed himself to close his eyes, the gravity of his actions weighing on his shoulders. Susanoo loved his wife more than life itself, and when a nasty demon took her away from him, he had lost himself. He took to bloodlust, craving nothing but death. He became what he and his brother fought, what they protected mortals from. Susanoo had become a demon. Seeing the genuine expression of regret and truthfulness caused her to clench her fists. She was such a fool. She had judged too soon, jumping to conclusions before she truly knew the situation. Brother, Hamura began, we need to go. Hagoromo turned to his twin, his fellow protector of the powerless. We have wasted enough time as it is. The pale-eyed Otsutsuki didn't mean to sound insensitive, or arrogant, he just naturally sounded so. He carried more grace, more nobility than even Hagoromo, and if he was anything, he was blunt, to a fault, even. Hagoromo sighed. His brother was right. We must be taking our leave, Tsukuyomi-san. He nodded his head. We are needed elsewhere. With that said, the brothers turned, walking away without another word. The goddess had long since taken her human form again. She just sat in the destruction caused by her foolishness, tears running down her tired face. Her brother was turned into a monster, tainted by his own hatred and sorrow. And he was cleansed from the human realm by the holy sage. Tsukuyomi cried. Very little could cause the two most powerful men in world such absolute anger, such absolute rage that they were currently feeling. They were peaceful, caring men, their life mission to guard the sacred beauty that is life. Rage and hatred were two things that were somewhat foreign to them. But right now, at this very moment, they were so very livid. The wildlife ran in the opposite direction, the plants whimpering in their presence. The ground trembled and the air was heavy and thick. There was no reverence shown to them by all things natural, only fear. They cried tears of anger. Everyone was dead. They had heard rumors of a demon rampaging across the country, leaving a trail of bodies and despair in its wake. But they didn't think that anything like this would happen. The demonic entity had only taken a handful of lives since the start of its carnage, but this was a massacre. The entirety of the small village was butchered, even the children. A small arm, that of a child, reached for the sky, buried in a pile of other bodies, broken and bloody corpses just laid out for anyone to see. It was a message. The foul creature knew they were tracking it. A sharp intake of breath sounded out behind them. Neither man was surprised. They had felt her trailing behind them, her obvious curiosity in them pushing her to follow, to witness with her own eyes what the men who stole from Kami did with their theft. She now wished she hadn't followed. What happened? Tsukuyomi asked. She was no stranger to death, having witnessed, and caused bloodshed on and off the battlefield. But never before had she seen such malice, such horrid massacre in all her life. No matter what the reason, there was never a proper cause to murder children. They were innocent, the sins of their ancestors were just that, their ancestors. This was an ugly thing, something that made her sick. This is the work of the real enemy, Tsukuyomi-san. Hagoromo spoke, the anger in his voice cutting the very silence like a hot knife through warm butter. A brutal, disgusting act meant to anger us, Hagoromo began to walk through the blood-stained village, a look in his eyes that Tsukuyomi could not make out. There is only one thing wrong with his little plan, Hamura began, his pale eyes filled with wrath and fury. Tsukuyomi turned her head to the tall man, her face questioning. Hamura looked to his brother, the two of them sharing a look. It worked. The sound of Hagoromo clapping his hands together, his fingers then interlacing, was heard. And then, suddenly and without warning, the entire village lit up in a dark purple light. Tsukuyomi's eyes widened, her heart nearly stopping. The sheer size and density of the chakra the man before her was unleashing on the village was, to be blunt, omnipotent. He hadn't even used a sliver of a fraction of this kind of power against her. If he had, she would have surely died, immediately. She was once again afraid of the holy soldier. The purple flames licked at the blood-soaked soil, a presence she was vaguely familiar with. Her breathing was labored, her throat suddenly dry. With her own eyes, she was witness to the most frightening feat she had ever seen in her lifetime. Yama, the king of hell, rose, his eyes matching that of the man she was now terrified of. The priest was commanding the bloody king of hell. With another huge surge of chakra and the great mouth of Yama stretched open to impossible proportions, obeying the commands of the sage. Again, with another incredibly ridiculous amount of chakra, the king began to spit green lights. Within seconds Tsukuyomi knew what the lights were. They were souls, the souls of the dead. The holy man was resurrecting the dead. It was terrifying. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was beautiful. Hagoromo wasn't just reviving the dead, he was like a beacon of rejuvenation, the scarred and broken bodies of the unfortunate murdered healing at rates not possible. Hagoromo was washing the death from the land, breathing life back into the village, in both the villagers and nature. He was fixing the world, it seemed. Tsukuyomi managed to tear her hypnotizing stare from the man and fixed it at his brother. She was met with something rather strange. Hamura was smiling. The last soul left the king of hell's mouth, the last of the deceased raised. With a silent command, Yama slowly faded back into the ground, the purple flames and overwhelmingly dark presence retreating. Moving with purpose, the brothers began to make their way out of the village, a confused goddess hot on their heels. Why hadn't they waited for the mortals to gain consciousness? Why hadn't they accepted the inevitable thanks and reverence they would have definitely received? It was a little suspicious. Her curiosity eventually won out, and she asked the question that practically burned the tip of her tongue, demanding to be voiced. Why did you leave before the mortals woke? She raised an eyebrow. Have you something to hide? Hagoromo stopped, Hamura doing the same. The priest looked tired. The next words he spoke would change the way the goddess looked at him forever. I wish to keep my humanity. He felt so peaceful. The beautiful woman who sat in his lap, her back pressed against his chest, gazed at the stars with him. The sky was a dark shade of blue, the fiery sun setting, oranges, yellows and reds mixed in a cacophony of beauty. The gentle breeze caressed their exposed skin, dancing in a way only the wind could. It wasn't cold, not with their natural body heat comforting them. The soft grass tickled their skin, reminding them that they weren't alone. They were never alone, for Mother Nature was on their side. He inhaled the precious oxygen the trees provided, and it rushed into his lungs. Exhaling, he felt the beauty he was allowed to call his wife shiver, his breath hitting her fair skin just right. The soft sound she made of the pleasuring feeling of his breath made him warm inside. He looked to the sky once again, his smile slowly fading. He knew what this was, but he didn't mind. He appreciated it anyway. It may have been a dream, but anytime he was with his wife, when he was with Tsukuyomi, he was at peace. He was always his happiest when he was by her side. He really missed his precious wife. He let his mind drift, allowing himself to just enjoy this time with her, even if it was but a dream, a memory. I love you, Tsuki, he whispered into the night sky, hoping she would hear him. Naruto walked with purpose, Itachi by his side, to the Uchiha compound. This trivial nonsense would end today, he would make sure of it. The Uchiha clan, one of the founders of the great Konohagakure no Sato, was planning to do something very, very stupid. It shouldn't have been surprising, though, all of humanity seemed infantile through his new eyes, but it still seemed too foolish to be contrived by actual adults. The mere thought sent his already baffled mind into something intimate with oblivion, and that said something about this coup d'état his descendants were planning. The Kyuubi attack had damaged more than just the village itself. With the attack, the relationship between the Uchiha with the rest of the villagers was all but broken. Herded into a corner of the village like sheep, the Uchiha had felt betrayed, ostracized by the very place they had shed blood for, protected for years, going as far as turning their backs on Uchiha Madara, their beloved patriarch. As a result, the sheep took off their clothes, and the wolves emerged. They cast aside their loyalties and took up the sword, believing the only freedom they could find was through a takeover. It was nothing but something akin to childish retaliation in the eyes of the blonde. Though the village was in the wrong for dumping the blame for something they had no part of on the clan as a whole, that did not mean the Uchiha were in the right. With what they were planning, war was inevitable. Unfortunately, in this shinobi world, weakness was one of the many sparks that could flare up a war. If one village struck, the others would follow. It was like a chain reaction, a sequence of events that could be predicted by even the thickest of fools. If the Uchiha attacked, those loyal to the Sandaime and the current system of things would retaliate. It would end in something even more disgusting than world wars, civil war. When family fought family, it was the saddest of things. Unity was crucial, if not the very foundation, of peace, and when people of one nation fought one another, it was the exact opposite of what needed to be done. And with civil war, no matter the victor, the village would be weakened. And weakness, as stated before, was the harbinger of war. A bringer of peace such as the Rakudo Sennin would have none of that. When he was told by a distraught Itachi, which was one of the few times he had seen the boy not his stoic, calm self, that something drastic would be definite if the situation with the Uchiha and Konoha Council didn't change fast, he knew what was needed to be done. That's when he decided to step in, to put all of his cards on the table, to take his first step in changing the world, to bringing it peace. The fear and anxiety in the person he called friend's eyes had been a gentle, but needed, push in the right direction. It was time he spoke to the Uchiha of Konoha. Arriving at the clan compound, Itachi led Naruto to his family's home, a nervous look in his onyx eyes. Naruto noticed this, and smiled. "Do not worry, little dragon," he began. "This is for the sake of our people, our family." Itachi felt a pang in his heart. Finally, someone who thought like him and Shisui arrived, having what was needed to change the current cycle, the cycle of hatred. Hi, Sennin-sama, Itachi replied. He took a deep breath of the afternoon village air, schooling his emotions into cool stoicism. It really surprised Naruto how the little dragon could calm his mind with such ease. It was a skill most had to work their entire lives for, and even then, complete mastery of one's emotions was as rare as it was difficult. But of course, Itachi was always one to completely break plausibility. He was but a child himself, and yet, even in this war-bound shinobi world, he had access to skills that made veterans green with envy. He could truly be a nightmare, if he had sunken as low as the rest of humanity. Again, despite all odds, Itachi was, and this was what earned him the respect of the Rakudo Sennin, a pacifist. He possessed power, he didn't crave it. He could look down on others, but he didn't. He could take as many lives as he wanted, but chose to stay his blade when he could. Yes, Uchiha Itachi was like him, like his brother. He was a bringer of peace. "I'm home," Itachi called out when they walked into the lavish home of the clan head. Traditionally styled, Naruto decided that it was too much for his tastes. They walked through a small hallway, their feet making soft noises on the wooded floors. Entering what he believed to be a kitchen, the two were greeted by a beautiful woman with long, black hair. Itachi's mother smiled when she saw her son. "Itachi-kun." Makoto greeted gently, her smile somewhat falling when she saw who was with him. Who's this, Itachi-kun?" she asked as politely as she could. She wasn't hesitant about the blonde because of his status as the J word, that's what Naruto started calling it, Jinchuriki being just too ugly a word to leave his tongue, but because of who his parents were. Makoto was one of the few people Uzumaki Kushina could confide in. That being said, Makoto knew that the red-headed woman was pregnant before Minato-san did. She knew Naruto was her best friend's son, that he was the son of the Yondaime, but she had to stay away from the boy. All Uchiha were forbidden to have any sort of contact with him. "Mother," Itachi began, his voice that of an Anbu operative of Konohagakure, not her little baby. "Where is father?" he asked. He looked to the blonde. "We need to speak." He continued. It's of great importance. She was silent, not able to answer her son's question in front of a non-Uchiha. The Naka Shrine was a holy place, outsiders were not allowed to enter or even know of its existence. The shrine just so happened to be the place for their conspiratorial meetings, where they practiced high treason. His mother's silence was all the answer he needed. Come, mother, he turned, walking towards the door, you should be witness to this as well. And with that, Itachi walked out of their home, Uzumaki Naruto at his side, headed towards the Naka Shrine. Makoto had a strange feeling about what was going to happen. She just couldn't determine if it was going to be a good strange, or a bad one. Explain yourself, Itachi. The deep and distinctly shocked voice of his father, Uchiha Fugaku, vibrated in the small room they entered not a minute ago. When Itachi walked into the Naka Shrine with a stranger, the clan head had been shocked. When he noticed the stranger was Uzumaki Naruto of all people, he had been furious. His son was putting the entire clan at risk. Father, this coup you are planning, Itachi looked to his friend who, nodding his head, gave him the courage to do what was right. It ends, today. He spoke, his voice laced with authority. Fugaku was not impressed. And why is that, boy? He asked. Itachi stayed silent, letting the person who decided it was a smart idea to speak to the Uchiha like they were foolish juveniles, talk. Because I say it is, Fugaku Baka. Ah. His host body's characteristics came and went like a fickle woman. It was very annoying. An outsider, never mind a child, has absolutely no right to speak here, nor do they deserve to speak to me in such a way. Fugaku replied, calmly, even though his expression was that of annoyance. Ah, but it is you who is both the child and the unworthy. Naruto smirked, the man's scowl amusing him. You will listen to me, boy. I promise you that. He usually didn't speak like this, his innate polite respectfulness always taking over, but this was a time when it was necessary. The Uchiha, in a general sense, were the embodiment of hubris. The only way to make them listen was, well, to actually make them listen. I have no intentions of letting you speak to me like this, Uzumaki. Fugaku was still trying his best to keep his cool. Injuring the Jinchuriki, who just happened to wield the Rinnegan, would be catastrophic. The Uchiha were already on thin ice at the moment, a spectacle like that would have the village looking where they couldn't afford them to look. Naruto's ringed eyes met the black ones of the Uchiha clan head, and everything changed. Slowly, one by one, black tomo began to appear on the rings of the purple eyes. Every time a single tomo appeared, Fugaku couldn't help but blink. Makoto, who was sitting next to her husband, gasped, her heart stopping. A Rinnegan with 9 tomo sitting on its rings stared at the Uchiha patriarch and matriarch. He had made his point, and fulfilled his promise. They would now listen to him. Do I have your attention now, Fugaku? He asked, dropping the baka, knowing that he'd have to suppress his childish tendencies for the conversation to go as planned. He took the man's silence as a yes, and continued. It saddens me, to my very core, Fugaku, that the Uchiha are treated in such a way. He stated in complete honesty. It also saddens me, however, that you have sunken so low. The Uchiha clan head narrowed his eyes, a dangerous glint in the now crimson orbs. Ah, see, he began, right there. That is what shall be your downfall. He sighed. Makoto just stayed silent, watching the blonde with mute awe. His eyes, he said that those eyes would return. Father, I have successfully secured the Uchiha's safety. Itachi announced, snapping his father out of his angry thoughts. Oh, he asked, patronizingly. And how's that? He asked, still upset that his son had brought a stranger into their sacred shrine. The Rakudo Sennin, the little dragon, spoke his name into existence. He walks the earth, again. His face was one of complete seriousness, not a shred of doubt or farce in his eyes. He was telling the truth, or at least he truly believed it was. You interrupt an important meeting, bring an outsider to our holy ground, and all you have to say for it is that a man long dead has returned to save us. Fugaku stood, fixed Itachi with a look of rage and disappointment, and stalked towards the door, his already thin patience vanishing. I do not wish to save the Uchiha clan alone, Fugaku. Naruto's soft voice rang through the room, almost echoing off the cold, stone walls. Naruto smirked, already knowing he had caught the man's attention with that. I plan on saving the entire world from what now plagues it like a disease. I wish to save it from this shinobi curse. There was silence for what seemed like an eternity, however it was probably less than 20 seconds, before Fugaku turned. You claim much, Uzumaki. He whispered, his Uchiha blood not letting him to just completely dismiss it all as words of an over-imaginative child, and when his prodigal son sat next to said child, nothing but a stoic expression marring his face, he couldn't help but wonder, a minuscule amount of wonder at that, if this was the truth. For if it was, it would mean the continuation of the Uchiha, the greatest clan to still walk the nations. I claim nothing but the truth. Naruto continued, and if we're being truthful, I must say, I'm more than a little disappointed in you. He let his gaze fall on even that of Makoto, all of you. The matriarch flinched while those eyes held her in their sights. It was like he could see her very soul. The fact that he didn't like what he saw somehow hurt her, which was very odd, this being the first time she had ever met her friend's son. And why is that? Fugaku decided to humor him. Naruto looked to Fugaku, and when their eyes met, the patriarch saw something no 7-year-old should possess. His eyes seemed to carry that of an aged war veteran. They were almost dull, like the cruel truths of the world were known within those eyes, seen with those eyes. It was enough to make the man flinch. The Uchiha, among others, are directly descended from me. He decided to speak with no half-truths, just the facts. For my own blood to fall into this shinobi way, this ugly, decrepit thing, is heartbreaking. He held the stubborn man's gaze, looking at him like a disappointed father would their child. Had I not brought peace to this world? Had I not shown you all the way? He shook his head. Had I not left behind instructions for those with eyes like ours? He brought his hands up in the air, a confused look in his eyes. I ask those of my lineage to safeguard humanity, to protect the land, not burn it to ash. His voice held a touch of anger, something that, somehow, worried the clan head. Was he really fearful of a child? You speak of the stone monument. Fugaku replied. You told the child about the sage stone. He aimed a dangerous look at Itachi, seething with anger at this point. No matter how fancy the blonde boy's eyes were, there was no way he was the great holy man. You will be punished for your treason, Itachi. Prove it. A soft, silky voice rang out, almost lost to the ears of those present. Naruto turned to the Uchiha matriarch, a golden eyebrow raised. Prove that you are the Rakudo Sennin. She elaborated, her courage wavering under the gaze of those eyes, under God's eyes. Itachi looked at his friend from the corner of his eye. Would Naruto prove his claim? When he saw the small smirk on his face, he knew, he had his answer. Very well then, if I have to prove myself, so be it. He brought his hands together, but paused. Once I do this, the Uchiha coup stops, immediately. Enough of Fugaku began to shout, but when the room flared with red and blue flame, his mind froze. Yin and yang mixed, colliding in an ethereal, majestic purple, filling the stone-walled room with pure, untainted life energy, the likes of which felt so clean, so rejuvenating that it calmed the frantic, somewhat angered minds of Fugaku and Makoto. It was a show of raw creation, a power no one but Kami should ever wield. They stared at the purple shine with reverence, the very air thick, heavy, causing them to take breath slowly, with trepidation, like they weren't sure if they had permission, the right to breathe in his presence, in the presence of this light, this creation. He called forth the words that attracted Itachi to him like bees to honey. Banbutsu Sozo. It took him some time, and he couldn't use it on the scale he was able to before, but with practice and meditation, the creation of all things was once again in his arsenal of abilities. The purple flame flared again, causing those in the room to shield their eyes. Upon opening them, sitting in the now opened palms of its creator, a small, was that a dragon, stared up at the Uchiha, blinking slowly. He had created life, to a majestic creature whose species was long extinct. The fire breathers gasped, seeing a child produce life from nothing, creating a mythical creature before their very eyes. It was his proof. He had proved it. Only an idiot would further deny it. Uzumaki Naruto was the Rakudo Sennin. Makoto bowed, followed by Itachi and then Fugaku, the respect and reverence for the greatest man to be born almost palpable. Naruto smiled. Raise your heads, Uchiha. He spoke to the family bowing to him. He had no desire to be worshipped. I am not your god, or your king. He wished to be their guide, the light in the dark to lead them to peace, to harmony. What are you then? Fugaku asked. There was no spite or anger in his words. He honestly wanted to know what the holy man would do for them. He was under so much stress with the clan that he almost forgot what hope and happiness felt like. The only time he ever felt something more than resentful rage was when he saw his youngest child smile. Sasuke was his little slice of relief in the thick darkness he and his whole clan were drowning in. The small, baby dragon beat its tiny wings, hovering in the air before resting on Itachi's shoulder. If I'm still being honest, I have no clue. He sighed. I brought humanity peace once before. I gave them understanding, harmony, a paradise on earth. He shook his head. But even with everything, humanity still wanted more. My teachings were corrupted, my beliefs spit on. He looked to his left at the plain wall. I don't know what the world needs anymore. He looked at Itachi. Does it need peace and prosperity that is brought with love and kindness? He swallowed, hard, looking to Fugaku. Or does it need subjugation brought upon with a dictator's regime and domination? He sighed. I really don't know anymore. Subjugation? Makoto questioned softly. Why would someone like you need to use subjugation? She asked. You're a holy man. You're all but worshipped in this time. All you'd need to do is announce your presence to the world and you'd have everyone at your command. Naruto chuckled dryly. My old name isn't even known to this era. He replied. Yes, Rikudo Sennin is still around, but even that title is only whispered in fairy tales and fables. He shook his head. The world wouldn't follow me, not now, not in this era. He knew this from the beginning. Shinobi think themselves invincible. They answer to either one person, or no one. Loyalties are something fierce to break, even for someone like me. It would be nigh impossible to unite the entirety of the elemental nations so suddenly. My name means nothing in this time. Uzumaki Naruto is nothing but an orphaned Jinchuriki with the eyes of a fantasy man. He once again shook his head. No, that would not work. He had already thought of all this. But still, world domination. Sounds, Makoto left the words to hang. Evil. He finished. I once thought that way as well. What changed? Fugaku asked, curious. I wish I could say humanity, but the sad fact is that humans haven't changed one bit, they just stepped their game up. Even before my first life, war plagued the land. It's almost as if it's an innate trait written in our DNA. He chuckled. What changed was me. He looked Fugaku in the eyes again. I'm not so naive anymore. I no longer have faith in mortals like I used to. Naruto asked Fugaku the question he wanted to know the most. My tablet, have you read it, what little you could? Fugaku nodded. He looked at his wife, and with a conceding nod, he began. To be truthful, I have not gained the powers of the Mangekyo, so I was only able to decipher very little of your words. He sighed deeply, like he was extremely sad about his next words, yet saying them with something akin to pride. My wife, however, unlocked them years ago in the war. Eyes wide in mild horror, Itachi glanced at his mother. Yes, Makoto had gained the cursed eyes when she was forced to watch her father tortured and killed during the Battle of Two Flags in the Third Shinobi World War. Unlocking the Mangekyo after her father no longer took breath in this world, Makoto used the fatal techniques it blessed upon her, or cursed. She was able to slaughter both shinobi villages that rallied under Iwa's name. The utter destruction and bloodshed had been great even when compared to the great destroyer of armies, which said a lot about it if compared to Namikaze Minato. It may also be the reason the Battle of Two Flags was rarely mentioned. It wasn't pleasant for anyone, on any side of the conflict. Mother, Itachi whispered in sadness. He would not pity her, however. No matter how gentle and ladylike she acted, she was still an Uchiha through and through. Pity was a great disrespect in the eyes of the Crimson Fire breathers. Even the small dragon perched on his shoulder tilted its head, looking at the woman with an undeterminable expression. She has deciphered much more than I, almost half of the Great Stone, and shared her knowledge with me. Fugaku continued. And even still you chose this shinobi life over one of Guardians? He asked, no longer angered, but hurt. I don't understand. Makoto began. The tablet says that we are superior to others, that we should do everything in our power to continue your legacy of greatness. She looked confused with Naruto's outrageous expression. Unless the other half explains further, you more or less told us to be kings," she finished in a soft, unsure tone. The blonde was silent, taking in this information. What the Uchiha Hime had just explained, the stone monument he left behind was either tampered with or replaced. This angered him more than he would explain. Someone was speaking to his people, using his name, telling them Kami knows what. It was the ultimate sin, the greatest weapon. It was the serpent's tongue. "Take me to the tablet," he commanded. He was not happy. Naruto sat in front of the ugliest sight he had seen in a long time. His stone monument, his life's hardships and helping words were gone, replaced with artifice. With his Rinnegan, all that was the Great Sage Stone, as the Uchiha apparently called it. He was able to read everything the tablet said, or more accurately, lied. It spoke of a man who was drunk with his power, a man who considered himself, and those who were born from him, the rightful rulers of humanity. This disgusting stone spoke of gods and kings, explaining that the ultimate power, the Rinnegan, was the only way for the kings to once again be gods, encouraging those with powerful eyes to do everything in their power to attain the eyes of God. It was sickening. He snapped. Anger, white-hot, pure anger welled within him, Kurama's chakra resonating with the emotion he was the embodiment of. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Someone had the nerve to so openly stand against him, to defile his name, his words with such carelessness. Naruto craved for something he never craved so much before. He wanted blood. He wanted the blood of the person, or persons, who led his people astray for so long. He closed his eyes, the three Uchiha who stood silently behind him not understanding the gravity of his rage. That was about to change. Kurama, the mighty Kyuubi no Kitsune, was a being of pure chakra, the largest fragment of a god split by a man who could very well take its place. He was a powerful force of nature, his very tails able to cause tsunamis. He was the most powerful Biju in existence, and was not easily frightened. He had faced men and beast alike, and never before had he ever showed fear, even when facing foes such as Senju Hashirama or Namikaze Minato. You could not scare what was fear incarnate, the embodiment of hate. He was centuries old, and in all his years, he had never been scared. Other emotions besides hate he was very intimate with. Loneliness, betrayal, pain, and despair, all these things he had felt at least once in his very long life, but fear was still a very foreign concept to the third eldest son of the Rakuto Sennin. But when his father appeared in the shared mindscape, their link between minds, with 9 Tomo sitting on the rings of his Rinnegan, a look of absolute rage that disrupted the still waters below, he couldn't help but think that the feeling he had in his stomach was fear. Kurama was afraid, because his father was probably the only being ever created that had the power to kill even a Biju. He knew his father wasn't looking at him with those hate-filled eyes, but even being in the presence of such anger that stemmed from the Sage of Six Paths struck the fear of God in him. He almost felt sorry for whoever angered such a powerful man, because his father was the scariest thing to grace this earth. Even the most peaceful of men could be pushed too far, and that's exactly what Kurama could see. Someone had pushed his father too far, and that only meant one thing. This person's end was nigh. Kurama. Naruto spoke, his voice still that of the 7-year-old hosts, but the power behind it was undoubtedly that of the great soldier of peace. Father, Kurama tried to keep his head up, trying his hardest not to instinctively bow, to obey this man before him. It was incredibly difficult. Someone has deceived my people, using my own tongue to do so. Kurama was able to gain his composure somewhat, his shock overwhelming his fear. My tablet has been tampered with. His father was so angry, so upset that someone would push his children into this dark place. Someone has forced hubris onto my descendants. Kurama's fear was now almost completely replaced with an emotion he was so very familiar with. The serpent's tongue has spoken as if they were my words. Blasphemy! Kurama screamed. His fear vanished as fast as it was brought upon him, anger in its place. Kurama, he continued, it is time I fulfill my promise to you. He brought his arms up, aiming them at the great bars that held his son as a prisoner. The eyes of God gazed upon the cage, and instantly, a gripping sound filled their ears. The bars creaked, small cracks beginning to form. Before his crimson, slit eyes, the metal he couldn't even scratch began to shake under the pressure of his father's technique, the same technique he used so many times in his first life. His father whispered those two powerful words, prying the cage apart, and his ears and soul. drunk them in, the beauty in them never ceasing to amaze him. Bansho Tenin. Fugaku, Itachi and Makoto had believed that they were immune to killing intent, to the mere flaring of chakra in an intimidating fashion, but standing so close to the pressure the blonde was releasing had thoroughly dismissed that belief. It started as dark, powerful killing intent, one that all but screamed anger and betrayal. The entire hidden room went cold, the air rushing away, fleeing the child. It was like a sudden switch, one that, when turned on, there was no turning it off, not until it chose to. Then, accompanying the outrageously scary killing intent, a sudden surge of mighty chakra filled the sacred grounds the Uchiha had watched over for years. The chakra was the exact opposite of the terrifyingly dark intent to kill. It was gentle, yet firm. It was soothing, yet jarring. It was both powerful, frighteningly so, and, in the only word the Uchiha could describe such, clean, chakra, divine. The walls shook, cracking under the pressure of such might. The ground rumbled, the air crying in fear. And then, a polar opposite joined the fray. Dark, ominous chakra that could only be described as demonic wrapped around the small form, filling the room with a dark red-black energy, only to vanish just as fast as it appeared. With the Sharingan, the Uchiha witnesses could remember the overwhelming chakra signature of the Kyuubi. Naruto was confronting the greatest of the Biju. And with his confident, joyed face, they could tell that he did so on his own accord. The fact that he showed no fear, but happiness, only further proved that he was the creator of the Biju, and the father of their clan. With the might of Kami herself, the father set free the son. Naruto stared at the free form of his son in silence, marveling at the beauty he possessed. It was enough to calm his enraged mind, but it wasn't enough to make him forget. I plan on hunting who's responsible for this sin, and I plan to make them suffer, just as my children have suffered by his hand. He looked to his son, an expression of uncertainty. I wish it were different, but with my current strength, he sighed. Will you help me, my son? It pained him to ask something so heinous of his son, but he couldn't afford not to. Kurama, standing before his father in all his glory, spoke in such a genuine tone that it worried the great sage as much as it brought him happiness. For you, father, he wore an absolutely determined expression. I'd rip the world asunder. He smiled, feeling the love in such dark, menacing words. He opened his mouth to speak, when suddenly, the most amazing thing happened. Bright, gilded chains rose from the watery ground, wrapping around Kurama with a determined grace. You will not have my child, Baka Fox. A beautiful female voice shouted from behind him. Agreed. A second voice called out, the gentle, yet powerful male voice also coming from behind him. Naruto turned, and was fascinated by what he saw. His parents were ridiculously clever. The gilded chains that held his son back were so bright, so beautiful it reminded him of his wife. Naruto turned, his powerful eyes meeting what should be impossible. Long, scarlet hair was the first thing he saw. Her fair skin and beautiful violet eyes came next, the determined, and slightly fearful, expression on her face greeting his shocked one. She was Uzumaki Kushina, his mother, his mortal mother. She was beautiful. A shock of bright, sun-kissed hair greeted him next, ocean blue eyes locking onto his purple, ringed ones. The man before him was a legend, a hero, a daydream and a nightmare. He was Namikaze Minato, his mortal father. His parents. I won't let you hurt my son. Kushina shouted, tightening the chains that were made completely out of her chakra. Kurama grunted under the pressure, but stayed still nonetheless. His father would not let them touch him, he was sure of it. Naruto. Minato yelled. He opened his mouth to yell again, but was silenced when he saw his son's eyes, and the following smirk. Naruto turned back to his son, simply waving a hand towards the bound Kurama. With little to no effort, the gilded chains fell, splashing into oblivion. No matter who they were, no being would touch his children ever again. He turned, his face that of a warrior during the calm before a war. Father, he called out. Mother, he continued, we have much to discuss. He could see the confusion and worry in their eyes, but continued anyways. With a wave of his hand, the trio of humans were no longer standing in the dark, dank sewer they had been not 3 seconds ago. Instead, the small family stood in what looked like a candlelit room, except there were no visible walls or ceiling. It was warm, but a small breeze somehow managed to brush against their skin. Naruto gave them a small, reassuring smile, hoping it would calm their frantic minds. Naruto, the seal. Kushina started, a panicked look marring her beautiful face. We have to seal the Kyuubi before it tries. Kushina was silenced when small arms enveloped her into a warm embrace. So you are my mother in this life, then? He whispered, his voice full of happiness and content. You are a beautiful woman, mother. He finished. Kushina was taken aback for a moment, before allowing her own arms to hug her son back, her motherly instincts kicking into overdrive. He was so big. He was so much smaller the last time she saw him, his infant body fitting into her hands. My Naruto. She whispered, shakily. My son. She cried. Her hands were shaking, and he could tell that she was crying long before the wet tears touched his scalp. Naruto allowed his mother to embrace him for many moments, their bodies so close, their warmth so inviting. It was almost as if it were real. The Kyuubi, Minato tried, but his voice fell on deaf ears. He sighed, deciding that if he couldn't beat them, join them. The yellow flash embraced his family for the very first time. They were reunited. After many minutes of mere holding, the small family finally pulled apart, and Naruto could see the tearing eyes of his mortal parents. That made what he was about to say all the more difficult. I am not your son. The incredibly stupid village was now beyond hope, they were that stupid. He was merely 8, still a child in most aspects of the word. He had just turned 8, and already, the village declared him an official shinobi of Konohagakure no Sato. It was incredibly disconcerting. He was a child, a baby, and they gave him a forehead protector and a blade, stripping him of his childhood and forcing him into adulthood. It was even still nigh inconceivable in his mind. How could a civilization be so lost in their ways to give children weapons and tell them that they were now adults? Moronic fools, the whole lot of them. It came rather quick, if he were honest. He had intended to only play the shinobi role until he was sure of what he wished to do, but that changed when he was revealed to the entire Uchiha clan. It took a little convincing, but his descendants now, secretly, of course, renounced their loyalty to Konoha and would follow him wherever he may take them. It was a huge step in securing the harmony of this world, one that he was completely confident about. He had finally learned the customs of shinobi village politics, and that had been the reason for actually following through with his shinobi training. Apparently, no matter what anyone said, any actions he would most definitely need to take would always lead back to Konoha. Fingers would be pointed, and one wrong word could result in definite war. It was a fact he hadn't planned for. Itachi had come up with the idea, actually. It was rather simple, but it was dirty and underhanded, something a shinobi would do, not him. But it was the only way he could go about it. Hence, he and Itachi would become missing nin, shinobi who betrayed or abandoned their home village. It was an ugly title, but he was already classified as the ugliest title known to man, so he conceded. Becoming a missing nin was actually a lot harder than some would think, or, a missing nin of a caliber they needed to become, more specifically. They couldn't become petty criminals, or even average ones. No, they needed to be the top of the food chain, they needed to be feared. Using fear as a weapon was something he very much disliked, but it was a necessity in this world. If they were feared, less shinobi would be sent to collect them. Their names would strike fear into green shinobi, giving them more and more room to work. They needed to be feared, to be recognized as dangerous men, because if villages were constantly trying to track them down, their plans would take years to complete. They were both in possession of powerful dojutsu, the greatest in the elemental nations, and Naruto carried what Konoha believed to be theirs. They were both more valuable than all the gold any village had. So, to gain the recognition they needed, they had to commit crimes of the highest degree. That came later, though. Currently, Naruto was patiently waiting to be placed on a team, which was a little annoying. He had gained shinobi status halfway through the academy year, and since there were no openings on active teams, he had to wait for the next batch of graduates. Unfortunately, Itachi was not given permission to take him on missions outside of the village, so he was stuck with the miserable D ranks the Hokage assigned to him as solo missions. By this time, he had completed 30 D rank missions, all of which were so dull he wanted to rip his hair out. The Hokage commissioned him to file the paperwork in the correct cabinets when they were finished. It was a waste of his time, and he had better things to do, or at least, more important things to do. There was much work to do with the Uchiha. There was absolutely no way his descendants would stay in Konoha, not after being treated like sheep, but they had nowhere else to go, not yet. He needed to have access with the outside world to find the perfect place to leave his people while he went out and gathered his children. Every day that passed, his sons and daughters were forced into a life of solitude and servitude. It was something he thought of constantly, their loneliness and hatefulness. And then there was the conversation he needed to have with the Sandaime that he absolutely did not look forward to, even in the slightest bit. The stone monument that had been tampered with to the point that it was hardly his stone monument anymore, brought something to his attention, and during his little reunion with his mortal parents, he slowly discovered something that smelt sinister. What do you mean you're not our son? Kushina asked in confusion. Naruto gave her a sorrowful expression. I am Uzumaki Naruto, but at the same time, I am not. He started. His mother looked at him in a way only a mother could, a way that hurt him to continue. The best way that I can explain it is to be blunt. He began. It may be confusing, but please listen to the end, okay? Kushina went to say something, but Minato stopped her. Our son has something to tell us, Kushina. He stated in such a way that practically screamed with the power he once had. His father looked to be an average, kind and gentle man, but those that knew him to be the deadliest man since the Sandaime in his prime. Let's listen to him like good parents should. He continued with a small smile that could even make his enemies blush. Kushina was silent for a moment, before nodding slightly. Naruto gave his mortal father a smile of his own in thanks before beginning. The two of you have at least heard of reincarnation, correct? He asked his parents. When he received short nods, he went on. Well, I have been reincarnated as your son, as Uzumaki Naruto. Seeing the worried expressions of his parents, Naruto held up a hand to prevent them from interrupting. Please, just listen, he kindly requested. When I first walked the earth, I was known as Otsutsuki Hagoromo. I have been called many things in that life, a priest, a sage, a holy man, the savior of this world, but the most prominent title I was given was the Rakudo Sennin. Minato finished, breathlessly. Kushina looked at her husband in exasperation. But when she turned back to her son, his expression genuine, she lost her breath. Her son, was he truly the Rakudo Sennin? Was her Naruto the reincarnation of the holy sage of six paths? Yes, father, I am. Was the Rakudo Sennin. He admitted. When you gave birth to, he was about to say, host, but intelligently reminded himself that the host's parents were in front of him, so changed his words skillfully. Naruto, I was lured to a confrontation of wills. These words confused his parents a great deal. Your son was to be the next link in a rather long chain. He decided to let them know the whole truth. My human children, Indra and Asura, have been locked in a battle that's lasted 1,000 years. He sighed while shaking his head. Like my own chakra, theirs was too powerful, too sentient that it could never truly pass on to the pure world. Unlike me, however, they chose to transmigrate, to be reincarnated as humans and continue their foolish war. Minato and Kushina listened with extreme interest. They were hearing ancient history, that's for sure. The last two links in the chain reshaped the landscape, and changed much of the world. He continued. They were Uchiha Madara and Senju Hashirama. He stated, causing his parents to gasp. Are you saying that two of the most powerful shinobi in our history were actually reincarnations of your sons, whose sole purpose was to continue an age-long war that's never been settled? Minato asked, trying to connect the dots of the story. Yes, Naruto began, they were both possessed by my human children. Before he could continue, Kushina spoke up. Why do you keep saying, human children? She asked. What other kind of children are there? It was kind of irritating her, the way he made sure to put human before children when speaking of his war-thirsty sons. Naruto smiled. Waving his hand behind him, Kurama's free form was led into the room of beginnings, the birthplace of all 9 Biju. The tailed beasts, Naruto began in a gentle, loving tone, are my creations, my children. Kushina stumbled back, taken aback by his declaration. Kurama is my third child, my first creation. He turned to his beautiful, 9-tailed son and smiled. Why you? Kushina tried to say, her words jumbled and her mind a mess. Naruto could see his father tense, his shinobi-trained body ready to take action at any moment. And when he took his father's speed and natural reflexes in consideration, He was somewhat hesitant to test the theory of him being in total control of his own mind. Kurama will not harm you, have no fear. He tried to reassure his nervous parents. He isn't the bloodthirsty monster you believe him to be. He tried. He is misunderstood and bitter due to his constant unjust imprisonment. Unjust. Kushina spit out. He's taken countless lives. Ours included, in case you forgot. She finished. Naruto sighed. If you were captured for the only purpose of leverage in pointless wars and sealed into human prisons for years at a time, wouldn't you be upset? He spoke, trying his best to defend his son. And let's not forget about the man in the mask. Kurama chimed his 2 cents in, the eyes of the Yondaime immediately widening. The man in the mask. He shouted. That's right, Naruto, you, the blonde raised a hand though. Please, whatever you wish to say can be explained later. He started. I wish to finish our previous conversation before we start another. Waving Kurama out of his parents' sight, they nodded, allowing him to continue. When Madara mixed Hashirama's cells, he was able to waken the Rinnegan through the combining of Asura's and Indra's chakra. He explained. Before that happened, the cycle should have continued. Asura and Indra should have transmigrated. Uzumaki Naruto was to inherit Asura's chakra, while Uchiha Sasuke was to inherit Indra's. Makoto's son, Kushina said sadly. Naruto went on. When Indra remembered the power he possessed when he had Asura's chakra, he desired more. He always wished to have my eyes, to have my power, but was never able to accomplish his goals in his life, until Uchiha Madara. Yes, Madara was brilliant, for he was able to accomplish something even Otsutsuki Indra, a genius even in the eyes of the Sage of Six Paths, could not. It was frightening. Deciding to strike at his brother while he transmigrated to another host, he tried to absorb Asura's chakra. He then smirked. That's when I showed up. He still didn't know how it was possible, but that was of little importance. I beckoned to my children. An unknown force brought me to my struggling children, and that's when I decided to step in, to break the cycle. He looked at his parents. Are you still with me? He asked. Kushina and Minato nodded, if hesitantly. Yes, I think we are. Minato replied. Please, continue. He offered. Nodding, Naruto continued. I then proceeded to absorb my children's chakra, and then bonded with your son's soul. This made both Minato and Kushina sharpen, wanting to understand everything that involved their son, their Naruto. So you can say that I am both Hagoromo and Naruto. But because Naruto was but a newborn, and I had already lived a full life, and then some, I took over as the main influence. He smiled. Naruto is me, and I am Naruto. We are no longer 2 separate beings, but one new, improved one. He reached out to his mother, pressing his small hand into hers. Even though I know of my past life's mother, I still see you as my mother. This life is the only one that matters right now, and you are my only mother in this life. He looked at her, hesitantly. Unless, you aren't okay with that, he whispered. He knew the logic behind everything, but that didn't matter to him. Uzumaki Kushina was his mother, no matter who anyone saw him as. She had given birth to him, to his body, his temple, so in that sense, she really was his biological mother. Kushina was silent for all but a millisecond before she wrapped her arms around her son and squeezed. No matter who or what you are or have been, she said in a comforting tone, you will always be my son. If he thought he'd get rid of her that easy, he was in for a big shock. She was his mama, end of story. He couldn't help the small, genuine smile on his face. He had never felt such strong love from a mother in his life. It was pleasant. And no matter how much you'd like to get rid of me, Minato started, wrapping his arm around his family. Again, I am your father, you hear me? He said proudly. It wasn't every day you fathered the Rakudo Sennin. Naruto chuckled at his father. He liked the sound of that, his father, and sighed happily. He had a family. He smiled to himself, letting Kurama fade back into existence. The towering form of the Kyuubi felt his father's insistence, and decided to obey his silent plea. Kushina and Minato were startled when a large, rather fluffy, orange tail wrapped around the 3 of them. At first, they thought the vile, dark creature betrayed even its creator, but were greatly surprised when nothing followed the embrace. The 9 tails was, hugging them. The Kyuubi, Kushina began. He's really not evil incarnate? She asked aloud, to no one in particular. Naruto smiled. Of course not. He petted the mighty tail of his son. He's just been so mistreated by the people he was made to help keep balance for, and betrayal can make anyone do horrible things. He stated firmly. You know, he was created as the embodiment of hope and love at the beginning. His parents looked at him like he had grown a second head. I'm serious, he began. But when betrayal occurs, hope turns into despair, and love turns into hate. He knew they understood. Humanity corrupted him, turning him into what he is today. Kurama was silent, already knowing this. But I plan to fix all of that, he stated confidently. What do you mean? Kushina asked. I have brought peace and order to this world once before already. He said. It's not easy, not in the slightest, but not impossible, either. He shook his head. The method I need to take is still a mystery, but the fact still remains, I will bring peace to the lands once again. His father swallowed, hard. The prophecy, it was right, he smiled. I was right, he finished, looking up at the giant fox. Ah, you speak of Gamamaru's prophecy. He started, shocking his father. Gamamaru? He asked in confusion. Naruto began to laugh, hard. Oh Kami. He rasped between chuckled. Don't tell me he's so old he's even forgot his own name. He was now clutching his stomach in pain. The old toad who could foresee the future can't even remember his own name. He started to calm down. That's just hilarious. He finished, taking in a deep breath before exhaling. Wait, Minato began, are you saying that the great toad sage of Mount Myoboku is named Gamamaru? He then recoiled back, as if he was struck. And that he was alive when you first lived. He knew the toad was old, but that old. Hi, Naruto replied. Gamamaru was born from my powerful natural energy ninshu. Naruto explained. The Mount Myoboku you speak of is most likely a location I used high amounts of, what is it called in the era? He thought for a moment before remembering the correct term. Senjutsu. Mount Myoboku must be a place I used senjutsu to the extreme. Minato and Kushina just nodded dumbly as they were explained the creation of the Honorable Toad summons. Father, I believe it is time to discuss the man in the mask. Kurama spoke up, deciding to gently push the conversation into something that needed to be discussed. I believe that he is responsible for the current situation with your Uchiha descendants. He finished. Kushina perked at that statement. The Uchiha are your descendants? She asked, almost completely forgetting her dislike for the Kyuubi. Naruto nodded. Yes, they, along with the Senju, and Uzumaki are directly descended from me. He answered, before smiling. So, technically, I'm your grandfather, Kushina-chan. He added the chan suffix to make his little joke even better. He quickly regretted that decision. Don't speak to your mother like that, Naruto-chan. She snapped. Her hair began to flare. Ominously behind her. That's when Naruto decided firmly that mothers could be very scary. Kurama snickered at how his father was so utterly whipped into shape by a mortal woman, before something rather strange happened. Oi, Kurama. Kushina scolded the beast. Don't be a bad influence. He looked at her like she was crazy for talking to him like that. Don't give me that look. I'm your grandma now. Even Naruto and Minato looked incredulous. So don't give me any lip, boy. She shouted, her tone final. Naruto just shook his head. His mother really was something else. Hi, Kurama conceded after a failed staring contest with the red-hot habanero. Kushina gave a look of smug victory. There was hope for her boys yet. After describing what actually happened the night of the Kyuubi attack, to his son, Minato became silent, seeing the incredible rage in his son's famed eyes. That's when Kurama decided to speak up. Father, he began, it was not Uchiha Madara who attacked that night. Minato met his slit gaze with a look of confusion. Years ago, that man put me under his control and forced me to fight the Shodai Hokage. I'd remember that man's chakra signature anywhere. He shook his head. That was not Madara. He finished. So someone is running around out there using Madara's name, and has the skill to fool someone like the Yondaime Hokage, Naruto began in an angered tone. Even if he is not Madara, he is dangerous. Naruto decided. And then there's the fact that the stone monument, he let his words trail off, before seeing his parents' confused looks, so he chose to continue. I left behind a stone monument for those who had ocular powers, hoping they'd reconsider when they had the eyes to decipher the entire thing. Minato caught the flush of new rage enter those powerful eyes of his son. Somehow, Someone managed to tamper with it, writing down false messages as if they were my own words. And apparently, according to the Sage Stone, Uchiha Madara survived the battle at the Valley of End. This had been very disconcerting to hear, but they had been talking about the man for a while now and his very name didn't cause any immediate gasps of shock anymore. It seemed Madara was capable of anything, that's how they saw the man now, which made him so very deadly. If he survived, the masked man could have some kind of affiliation with him. Minato thought out loud, and if that's the case, we have a serious problem on our hands. Kushina looked at her husband. What do you mean? She asked curiously. Besides the obvious, he started, receiving a nod from his wife, the alliance of two men who could enslave a Biju with a single look would complicate things. He decided to choose his words carefully when it came to the tailed beasts around his son. He knew if anyone badmouthed Naruto, he'd be the first to defend him, and not just because he was the fastest man alive. And the fact that the masked man was able to break through multiple Anbu guards, separate you and I, release the Q Kurama, he fixed his slip up, and then fight me while unleashing the power of a Biju on the village all almost flawlessly will already make this plan of yours difficult, Naruto. He shook his head. I wish we didn't have to leave you. He hissed softly, his emotions in turmoil at the thought of abandoning his child, again. Kushina mirrored his sorrow, turning to her son. I don't want to leave you either, Naruto-chan. She knew he was powerful in his own right, and that with age he would become the most powerful man to walk the earth, again, but she was still his mother, and she still worried about him. A single tear fell from his mother's ducts before he was at her side, a wild grin on his face. Who said anything about you two? Leaving me? He touched two fingers to their heads, both his right and left hands, index and middle fingers tapping their foreheads. With a surge of chakra and raw creation, the diminishing chakra that tethered his parents' souls to the seal within him vanished, replaced with something different, something stronger. What did you just do? Kushina asked, her eyes wide in shock with her newfound energy. You two are incredibly clever, but when it comes to, once again, he took a moment to think the correct term of a certain skill set in this era, before finishing. Yes, when it comes to Fuinjutsu, my brother was superior in every way. He smiled, somewhat sadly, at the thought of his beloved brother, the man who stood at his side since they were born from the rabbit goddess. Being around him, one can't help but pick up some rather useful tricks. When he saw the incredibly curious looks on their faces, he elaborated. Your souls were anchored, or tethered, to this realm by the rather ingenious seal you used to trap Kurama. The giant fox grunted, before Kushina gave him the grandma look, and he decided to watch his mouth. So far we understand, Kushina replied. But with that method, only the specific chakra that was sealed away would exist, and when that ran out, you two would vanish, your respective chakra unable to replenish itself. He smiled. But with this method, he showed them the most complicated looking seal array they'd ever seen, evens on top of odds, with more evens above those. But when you place an odd-numbered seal on an even-numbered seal, or vice versa, an imbalance is created. Minato voiced both his and his wife's confusion. Naruto just smiled. That is true, he nodded, before gaining a smirk, unless you know how to layer two or more seals together. His parents' owlish eyes amused him. The odd-numbered seals are actual even-numbered ones, they're just layered on top of one another, appearing to be odd when it is actually even. You don't have to understand it, just know that I changed the anchor. He waved off the complicated art of layering seals onto other seals, deciding to explain the outcome, not the process. Your chakra will now replenish, feeding off the raw yin-yang chakra my soul exudes. His soul was the very essence of life and death, which was why he theorized he had control of both abstract powers. Unless I die, the two of you could live forever off my life energy. Seeing the fearful expressions of Minato and Kushina, he just chuckled. It's not harmful in any way to my person at all. I won't even feel the drain. Trust me when I say I could power an entire village with my soul for eternity if I chose to. He reassured them. So, Kushina began. We don't have to leave you, then? She asked softly. Naruto smiled, before the four of them were no longer standing in the room of beginnings, but in front of a rather cozy-looking house that sat in the middle of a beautiful forest, a lake a short walk away from the house's porch. It's not very glamorous, Naruto started, but you two could stay here, if you'd like. Kushina cried, while Minato just nodded. They could stay a family. Hope you guys enjoy first part of this story. Do like, share and subscribe.